the night of like my third ceremony, I just got these vibes. I was like, bro, we're going into the fucking shadows tonight. And I was like, I'm fucking scared, bro. Like, because like even if you can't necessarily pinpoint it, everybody knows the shadow that's like inside of themselves. And like some guys have done some fucking shit.
You are now listening to the ANR Design Unholstered podcast with Alex Costa.
All right, Mr. Gonsior.
Well, everybody thinks it's French. It's not French.
Well, what is it?
It's Polish.
But it has an IER?
It used to have a ski on the end of it. It used to be Gonzorski.
Gonzorski.
But yeah, it was a joke in my family. Only a Polak would masquerade as a Frenchman. And this, I don't know how it is. Is there a lot of discriminatory against French over here? Maine's like, oh man.
Well, I mean, yeah, because we have Montreal.
Yeah. I assume it's
yeah. Well, I mean, they're kind of, like, you go up to Montreal and they're pricks. And you know, they'll say, thank you, merci. And if you accidentally say merci, then they start speaking French to you and you're just like, oh shit. No, Francais. And then they're just like, American. You're like, all right, fuck me.
Oh, you fucker, you live across the street. Like,
all right. Well, this is episode 27 of the ANR Design Unholstered podcast. I'm your host, Alex Costa. And today's guest is Rudy Gonz. He is a wonderful spirit animal, unicorn of a long gunner, and one of my good friends. It's hard for me not to laugh introducing you because like there's not a moment in time that doesn't go by that we're just like fucking with each other or you're fucking with Pete.
yeah, it's really it's hard to take a relationship serious sometimes, talking about Snickers bars and other odd things, but yeah.
Yeah, that's fun. We have a couple buddies, Pete and Brett, and they do privates up at Ridgline where Rudy teaches, and things get kind of rowdy. It's good though. It's good rowdy. It's like the motivational rowdy.
It's some of like my favorite times, to be perfectly honest. It's a chill time. It's basically like, oh, you guys are coming up? Well, I guess we're just gonna hang out and shoot guns and teach you guys everything I know. And maybe pack a little bit too much tannerite into the car.
Wasn't there for that, but oh my God. But it's one of those things that it's a lot of fun, but you also take the training aspect really seriously with us because I've taken a lot of classes, a lot of places, and I still, like, no offense to Jay Pedro, but when I leave a Rudy class, I want to die. Not want to die, but I usually need a day of rest after because you like to push us and you have fun with it.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's like, to me, like that's like kind of something I guess I've fallen into like over the years, you know, like I like to have like a good time. I mean, everybody does, you know. I kind of look back to my years when I was going through, I spent a bunch of time working on like my guide license in Maine, and that was one of my huge takeaways. Was one of my instructors. They always said, you know, you have, like, in order to have a successful trip, it has to be safe, it has to be legal, it has to be fun. And like the fun part, I'm like, well, yeah, like that makes so much sense. Like people want to have a good time, but it is something that I do take like super serious. Like obviously from the safety aspect, like, you know, like things exploding and guns going off, you know, like you do have to, like there's a management process of that for sure. It's not all by the seat of your pants, but you know, like to me, like it is a very serious thing. Like I guess I take my vocation like to heart, you know, like the martial aspect of what I do is always kind of in the forefront of like my mind. You know, to me, like that's something that's very important. I know a lot of people look at, you know, firearms training, kind of there's a lot of different aspects, you know. For me, like martial and sustainment, like, you know, sustainment hunting, like those are those are like my personal passions. I know some people it's like a hobby and like a sport or whatever, but for me, like that's why I push hard, because I'm like, your life is and your wellness is eventually depending on like these skills I'm trying to pass on. So it's good to know that bleeds over.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, you know, who you are, who you work for, what do you like to do, your background. You were featured for people that might have come across Rudy in the social space on the internet. My favorite are seeing some of your sniper photos that show up on the Spec Ops pages with your mohawk, and people are like, oh, these fucking hitter ass dudes. And I'm like, oh, it's fucking Rudy.
if you Google me, you come up with a very interesting spectrum of different things for sure. Everything from psychedelics to freaking memes. So my background, for those of you who don't know me, so I started out many moons ago in the Marine Corps. I started out as a basic rifleman. That's kind of when I kind of fell in love with long range shooting. You know, I'd kind of grown up shooting like air rifles a lot, so I spent a lot of time, but never really had a lot of time like on a gun until I actually went to the Marine Corps. And I was pretty much hooked like from day one, like on the rifle range. I was like, this is freaking badass, man. Like, I want to do more of this. And so I did my time there. I went to MARSOC 2007 through MARSOC selection, and like it was during there I met a bunch of like Army SF dudes. So it was kind of like a really weird time. The Marine Corps was getting back into SOCOM, and so they'd grandfathered like a bunch of like the Force Recon dudes in to start up MARSOC. It was just kind of a mess, but half of the cadre was actually like retired like Army SF dudes and colonels and sergeant majors and stuff like that. So they were kind of serving as kind of cadre to kind of stand up MARSOC at the time. And I met those dudes, and they were just like fucking gods. And I was like, I want to go hang out with these dudes. And so literally as soon as I was done with selection, like I got out of the Marine Corps and I went to the Army. And I ended up going to Army, ended up in Special Forces. And been doing that now. This is year 20 that I'm on right now. So my time there, you know, just kind of grew. Started out kind of doing the assaulter stuff, you know, pistol carbine stuff. And eventually, like, I kept on, like, kind of working my way towards it, and then I finally got offered a slot to go to sniper school, and that was, like, my jam. Like, as soon as I went to sniper school, I was like, this is it. Like, this is where I want to be. And so I spent a bunch of time as a sniper, and then eventually I got asked to go teach at the Special Forces Sniper course. And so I taught the level 2 for about 3 years. Which was pretty awesome. You know, like, again, it's pretty cool because the way that everything is organized, it's within what we call like the special skills detachment. So you're still you're just literally down the hall from like all the assaulters and stuff. And so you get a chance to kind of do like a lot of like cross training and stuff, but it was awesome, like a learning experience. So literally, like I always tell people, like, you will learn more by teaching something than you'd ever thought. You know, like I'll never forget the first sniper course that I was an instructor in. Like, I realized how much I didn't know. Like, I was like, oh my God, you know, people are asking me questions, and I'm like, I don't know how to answer that. You know, like, start realizing in order to answer a lot of questions, you actually have to know 2 or 3 levels deeper, like, into a topic. And so it really forced me to like deep dive stuff and really get into stuff. And then as my time there progressed, you know, I started developing new courses. I hit like the hard target interdiction course. We rebooted that. That was kind of like my opus, like creating that. It was something that was like a personal passion for me from my experiences in Afghanistan. And that just kind of like really fell into instructing, and there was a lot that I really liked about it. And then I ended up leaving active duty, which was kind of a hard choice for me. I was really getting burnt out. You know, a lot of people think like instructing's a break. And I tell you, it's not. I worked way harder as an instructor doing than anything else. Like, because you're always there before everybody. You're there during everything, trying to solve everybody's problems, and then you're picking up the pieces once everybody goes home. So it's like, it's a lot of work. And so it was getting to a point where I was just like, I need to take a break. And so I got out, and after that I ended up kind of wandering around for a little bit, but I ended up finding a couple friends of mine, Alex Hartman, and have you met Dave Seymour? I don't know if you've actually met him.
I hear about him.
He's a legend.
Hear about him a lot.
So so we met up and we just had like this fucking crazy idea about like creating something different like in the training community. This was a little bit after, Magpul Dynamics had kind of come out, and those dudes broke kind of like a lot of ground like in the instructor world that hadn't really been broken since like the old days from like, Gunsight and stuff like that. And so we wanted to create something new, something different. And so we started that process with Ridgline. So we started out, we did a lot of mobile stuff early on because we didn't have like our own place, but we knew that we wanted we had to have like our own facility in order to actually train the way that allows it to be successful. Like after, just between the three of us, we had, over 60 years of experience like in global war and terror. And like all these things that we had been taught, some of those things turned out to not be true. Like there's all sorts of stuff that just keeps on getting regurgitated. And a lot of the training, a lot of the curriculum, a lot of the facilities that are out there, they kind of restrict what reflects in the real world. And so that's like what we wanted to change. Like we wanted to put like real stuff out based off of our experiences. And honestly, a lot of facilities out there, a lot of ranges just are not set up for that. And so it was a process to finally get it, but in 2019, we finally opened our facility up there in Dalton, New Hampshire. And been up there ever since, so it has been a journey to create, and it's still an ongoing, every time you're up there, everything freaking changes. It's just something new. But that's been pretty much my mission, my passion for, the last couple of years. Been doing that pretty hard, and right now I'm kind of stepping back a little bit from that, going back. I spent a bunch of time here in the National Guard. National Guard SF, which is it's not quite like the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year sort of thing. Like I've legitimately probably spend as much time deployed as I did when I was active duty. So, but I've taken a lot of time off like from that, and so now I'm kind of plugging myself back into that community. Like a lot of people are like, oh man, you're at 20 years, you should be like, you're gonna retire. And I'm like, fuck no, dude. Like I'm just getting started. Like I'm like on round 2. So I'm like super excited about that. I just went back to a team this year. So I'm pretty pumped, but kind of taking a lot of stuff that we've been working on and just plugging it back into the real world. And ice cream cone just keeps on licking itself, man. That's how it goes.
And you talked about changes at Ridgline. Ridgline, every time I'm up there, and it's been, the first 2 years because of COVID and everything, you guys kind of had some slow times because, during COVID, teams weren't going anywhere, training wasn't going anywhere. Team O'Neill took a hit. So you guys are across the street from Team O'Neill. So 50% of Team O'Neill's business is government, fed, law enforcement contracts, and now they have the shooting capability across the street. So you guys have that nice little balance, yin and yang with Team O'Neill, which is super cool. And Littleton has some decent lodging, so you're kind of like a one-stop shop up there. Yeah,
Littleton's like a weird place. Like a lot of people don't realize how much goes on up there because it's so quiet. But yeah, in 2019, when we linked up, it was Team O'Neill that kind of like helped us like get in because we started working with those guys, and like you said, that's what those dudes kind of really do is they're training Bill, OGA, LE guys. And so we came in to basically support the firearms packages of that. This led to an absolutely awesome relationship and probably some of, I would say, the coolest cutting edge military courses that I've ever seen. So it's been pretty awesome for us. And COVID was like kind of a weird, like, yeah, there's like definitely like a lot of like government freeze, or whatever, and everybody's like, I don't know what we're gonna do. But honestly, it wasn't really all that bad. It's what drives, I'd say, a significant portion of kind of like our revenues, like those contracts and courses with those dudes. But they're a great bunch over there.
Yeah. So, and again, every time I go up there, capabilities are changing. The landscape of Ridgline is changing. You guys have a Connex tower now. You have a little Connex town, so you can do your shoot no shoots, your room clearing, sniper tower shit. You have your long gun out to 1200.
So I'll give you the basic rundown, but. Yeah, you hit most of it. So like on our side of the street, so we have about, I think we're at like 130 acres now on that side. That's where like most of our main facilities are at. So the towers and the little Connex villages and our primary ranges are over there. That side of the street, we got out to 600, and then we got obviously the pistol bays and stuff. Eventually we'll be having, breaching bay going in, so we can do demo breaching. Then over on the other side of the street with the Team O'Neill, we've worked with them to kind of utilize their space, because they have like another almost 700 acres over there. So over there, we have like our 1,200 yard range kind of set up over there. For anybody who's gone to the Mountain Rifleman course, that's something that we've been working on heavy this year, trying to get that facility up and running over there. So we have 1,200, and then we also have select shooting points. We can go out to 22 over there. So we got a lot of space over there, and like I said, it's just kind of chipping away, kind of shaping, which takes time. Like honestly, like if you go there and you look at the berms, like this guy drove the dump truck. It's quite a bit of work to move the whole mountain and get it to where you want, but it's an awesome place. Like you said, Littleton is pretty fucking sweet little town. You got all sorts of little cool places to eat. It's good lodging, yeah. But we don't have any noise restrictions. We don't have any FAA restrictions up there. So we have HLZs that we can land at. We can do laser stuff. Like we can do pretty much anything as long as we generally keep on good terms with the neighbors. But
yeah, and you got some pretty crazy wins over on the Team O'Neill side.
Yep.
So your mountain rifle course is a newer course. You broke a lot of dudes that thought they were fit, I heard.
Yeah,
I heard, and it's funny because you told me a couple things, but then I shot a match with some boys from Vermont, and they were like, "Oh yeah, Rudy, that it was a very short hike, but it broke some dudes that you thought spend time outdoors."
Yeah, the mountain rifleman course, that's kind of been like my baby this year. So I was like, I want to start like leveraging like the terrain that we have up there, because anybody who's been up there and has shot like the PRS match, like the years that we ran the PRS match, we were the lowest scoring match in the country. Number one reason is the winds, like hands down. Like the targets are fucking huge, but the winds just eat people's lunch. And no splash. The winds and the veg are pretty rough, and it's kind of like a real shooting lane over there. Like it's not like something you go down to like Altus or something like that. Like it's a real world. It's a fucking mountain. So the shooting positions, alternate shooting positions are what they are. But the targetry mimics fairly well what you're going to see in the kind of the real world. And then the winds themselves are, they're rough. We're 30 miles from Mount Washington. I think it's now the second highest wind speed land record, like anywhere in the world. So on an average day up there, it's not uncommon to have anything from 12 to 60 miles per hour. So if you don't have a good base for like understanding wind, you're going to really struggle. Because there's like what we call like basic wind, then we get into that terrain over there, like opens up into what we call like a cross compartment scenario. So cross compartment wind management, you're using a very similar base. So as long as you have a good base and you understand like a process of like the function, you can be successful. But it's one thing that I've realized, like training, especially like long gun stuff, is when it comes to process, a lot of guys just don't have one, right? Because they're piecemealing stuff together. And it's somewhat understandable that there's no structure, really. It's something that I think I've often taken for granted. Like when we go to like a sniper course, I've been to, CIFSIC level 1, CIFSIC level 2, DM, HTI. I've been through all these different sniper courses. Everything's structured to grow off of something. Even the basic, sniper courses, you're learning stuff in sequence, and you're spending a fair amount of time on that. Where if you're kind of piecing together like your own learning and knowledge, sometimes you're learning stuff like that's maybe out of sequence, and so maybe you're like don't understand the context or like where it goes. And so that's honestly what we spend a lot of time doing in our courses is teaching processes. How do you teach a process? I'm interested in teaching the process and understanding of like mechanics, because I can't put you through what I've been through like in 2 days. Like 2 days is not enough time to be good at anything. But I can show you what the mechanics look like, so you know what right looks like, and then I can show you the process and the steps to do that, so you can take that and then you play it out over and over, and that's kind of like what we refer to like the maintenance. So you got mechanics, you got the maintenance, which is what you're doing on your own time, and over time that progression leads into like actual mastery if you put in enough work. But putting in not just enough work, but the right sort of work too. Like again, it goes back to process. You can spend 10,000 reps, but it doesn't really mean much like if your reps are shit. Then you just have mastery of 10,000 shitty reps. So it's a struggle sometimes, like rebuilding shooters, where it's like I have to, honestly, sometimes the shooters that have been shooting the longest that are the hardest to rebuild. New shooters are like my favorite. Like new shooters are like women. Like if you're a woman, please come to my course. Like, because there's like so little ego sometimes where I'm just like, all right, do this, and they do that. I'm like, now do this. That.
They don't have the belief that they're capable of what you're teaching them. Oh my God, teaching. So quick, sorry to interject. One of my best friends, Jess, grew up with her, and she brought her husband to the range, and he's not a gun dude at all. Doesn't really intend to be a gun dude. But I spent like 2 hours at the house dry firing guns, teaching them press, this, stance, how to hold a gun. And we got to the range, and he's kind of loitering, waiting for me to give him something to do. And she just goes up and just starts jamming mags, picks up the gun, never shot a modern day handgun before. And she goes, oh, can I shoot at that piece of steel? Like to my wife? And she's like, yeah. And she's just ding, 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 ding. And I didn't sit there and I was like, I'll go walk John through it. And she just picked up the gun, started jamming rounds and started shooting. And trigger placement, you could hear the reset clicking, clacking away. Like she was running reset, and she had never shot gun. Like, it was perfect. It was so good. And she listened to me in a safe environment before getting her behind a gun. And at the end of the day, she was ripping a 5.56 machine gun, like squared off to it, leaned into it, and not to bash John, but he kind of like leaned back and it pushed him around, and she cleared the target. And I was like, you should probably own a gun.
I think you hit on a very important point there about like expectation. Expectation versus like intention. I think sometimes when we come to like things like this, we put a lot of expectation on ourselves. I'm like, all right, I gotta figure this out. And a lot of that I think is connected to like the ego. So like you have this idea, you've painted this picture of like your performance and who you are, and then when you start to like pressure test it, it just all comes apart, and like it's hard. You start second guessing yourself, and you're like, well, and then you start hyper focusing on one thing, which means then you forget about something else. You're like, oh, I gotta fix my trigger pull, but now your grip sucks, not aligning the sights or whatever. So I think like when we place like that expectation on things, like it makes it more difficult sometimes, which is again, new shooters or shooters that tend to come with an intention to create something versus the expectation of performing to something. A lot of times like that alleviates like some of those difficulties. That's definitely a pretty good recipe for life, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, I just learned, one thing I did learn is I can't teach my spouse.
Oh, I don't know if anybody can.
It's one of those things where, it's funny because she knows how to shoot a gun. She knows how to, jam mags. But there's a crutch there, like, hey, like the second she starts shooting, she could do it on her own, unsupervised, no problem, probably diagnose her issues herself, which she's able to do, and then, compartmentalize those issues and tune them out and run the gun really well. But sometimes when I'm there, it's like she kind of reverses herself back to her most basic form because I'm there. Because like, oh, he'll help me if I'm struggling or something like that. So now I just don't tell her anything. She'll be like, oh, what am I doing? I'm like, you figure it out, and then she starts breaking it down. But I've been trying to get her, I was like, can you go take a class? Like, I'll pay for you to go do a Ridgline class or a ladies class, even at Sig Academy would be a good starting point for her. Like, take a class, and because you need to be taught by someone that's not me. She's got really good fundamentals. She just needs to apply them. So I'm just like, I can't teach my spouse this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes straight back to intention and expectations. When you're with a spouse, somebody that you've been with for a long time, like you have a certain expectation of like how the communication relationship's going to go. So it's like it can kind of put a kink in like trying to teach or learn something new a little bit, where it makes it a little bit more difficult. I don't say it couldn't be done. Could be done, but
a little bit more frustrating.
Yeah, I think it creates an interesting dynamic versus going to somebody else.
Yeah, and my wife also, she does it. I'm a good shooter, so she's trying her absolute best to shoot well. I did notice though, like I got her, her first gun was a Glock 19. Didn't shoot it well, right? And then I got her a Sig Sauer X Carry. Didn't shoot it well. Put a better trigger in it. Still didn't make the gun a better shooter. She's got Delta Point Pro on it. She's pretty much blind in her right eye, like really bad vision, so she's left eye dominant, cross eye dominant. But she's got such a warped depth perception because of her eyesight in the right eye and I didn't even know how bad it was till I stood over her with a can on her Glock 19 and she was aiming like 6 inches left of the center of the target. And I was like, what are you aiming at? She's like, center of the target. I'm like, oh my God, okay. So I called Mike Pannone and I was like, what's the best way to train this out since you can't see in your eye, like, please teach me how to teach my wife, right? So Pannone was like, okay, this is what you do. And so we got her dialed in now. But now she likes Gucci guns because she's really good at trigger press, but both her Sig and her Glock, it was just like a little too chonky for her. And then her Sig's dot like jump slides over like 2 mils because of the FCU and shit. So she can't run that gun. So then she's like, oh, give me your custom P01 or give me your staccato or give me your high power. She runs the high power like a champ too. And I was like, so I need to get you like a staccato C2 or something like that. Like, she's like, yeah, give me one of those guns. I was like, well, it's got a safety. You got to train that because she's never had to train safety. But I don't know, I'm probably gonna have to get her a nicer gun because she just shoots them so much better. Guns don't make you a good shooter up until a certain point.
Yeah, up until a certain point. Like, there's definitely like fundamental mechanics that you have to have. And that's something I see a lot. People trying to like buy their way like into performance, and it's a balance. Because there's that old saying. It's not the Indian, or it's not the arrow, it's the Indian, which is absolute fucking horseshit. And like the arrow fucking matters. Like you have to have good stuff in order to perform to your maximum, but like. Same time, if you don't have a solid grasp of the fundamentals, you're chasing your own tail. So I see that a lot, like pistols. Pistols is a tricky thing. It's honestly one of the things that I think it's one of the hardest platforms to shoot. But like a lot of times, it's what people are going to be exposed to first. So the expectations of going into that, it can be pretty heartbreaking. Like for some people, I know for me it was. When I learned to shoot pistol, I learned how to shoot pistol in the Marine Corps. In the Marine Corps. In spite of having an awesome basic rifleman program, it does not have an awesome pistol program. And I struggled for years how to shoot pistol. Like it wasn't even until I got to the Army, it was basically by volume. Like that's how I learned to shoot. I was like, I'm gonna spend the next couple like 10,000 rounds doing this. I'm like, this doesn't work that well. Maybe I'll go to something else. And after spending tens of thousands of rounds, you kind of start to figure out stuff. But it's hard, even when I started teaching, with Alex, like he's, Alex Harmon, he's a phenomenal pistol shooter. And I was like, damn, and I had to like basically rebuild like all of my pistol shooting because it was like this mixed mash, like fucked up. So that took me back to kind of understanding, like, especially on the precision side, teaching that, realizing where people are coming from, you know. Some people have like a mixed mash of like different stuff that they've learned or they heard. And so sometimes you got to deconstruct that stuff, but having good equipment, I mean, that's a huge thing. Like, I see it all the time, you know. Sometimes people just don't know. Sometimes people are like, I can kind of maybe fudge this. And sometimes you're just making it like way more difficult than it needs to be. Good.
My special purpose rifle that I brought with me that last time I trained with you, and I kind of built it in a vision after one of the guns that you let me shoot of yours, but I kind of like, I was just off the mark with some of my selections for...
So close.
So close, but yet so far. And I changed it, I rebuilt the whole thing, put a 1.7 on it, got the LaRue Harris bipod on it. I moved that back a little bit. So a little bit less comfortable getting to my laser and light switches, but way easier to shoot from with my Picatinny rail there. I put on a Sierra grip.
Nice.
Yeah.
People don't know about that.
I got rid of I had a KE Arms trigger, wasn't happy with it. I put in an SSAE Geisley, made a huge difference. So everything's like super dialed in. Now I did move my aim point forward because I noticed I was getting so much carbon buildup on the lenses being over the ejection port. And then I just noticed Badger is releasing a 12 o'clock for it finally. Yeah. So I'm going to swap over to the 12 o'clock when that comes out. But yeah, I kind of got it to this happy medium now. I haven't shot, I want to run it in another class. Next time Brett does like a precision or SPR, I'm going to definitely run it and see, you know, I put the B5 SPR stock, the new Army stock on it. I like it because that quick adjust comb. It's nice too. If I like have tubes on, I can jack it up a little bit more. And I was kind of I can, like where I have it now is great for no tubes, and then jacking it all the way out is like perfect for tubes, and then having the aim point more forward is I can passive shoot through it too. So I'm like really happy where I got it, but like you said, the equipment can hinder you. I mean, I was running the US Red Winchester 62 grain OTM, which wasn't an OTM.
Only the best.
I couldn't get 77s in time, and I have a very small supply of 77s at the house, so I was like, fuck. So I bought like bulk of this shit Winchester, and that fucked me because I was like, what can I get out of this class? Oh, I know a lot of fundamentals. I shoot long gun. I shoot a lot of carbine stuff, but I'm in a Rudy class, and I'm not actually able to call wind well at 600 yards with this ammo because it's the ammo that's fucking me, not the wind. So yeah, I mean, then I went and bought a couple thousand rounds of 77 SMKs, and I'm like, okay, now next time I go up and Rudy's teaching SPR, like I'll be dialed in again. But yeah, I had like a 80% or less impact rate because of the ammo, not the shooter, and that fucking sucked because I felt like, oh, I could have taken away more from this class if.
Yeah, I mean that's like that's always what I'm trying to tell people. Like, people are always kind of looking to like round corners on stuff, and like when it comes to quality of equipment, like you're looking at like the circle components, right? Whether, you know, we got the rifle, you got the optic, and then you got the ammo. Like, you need to be solidly based in all those. You can have the most awesome rifle, best fucking optic, and you feed it some dog shit ammo, it's only ever going to produce what the ammo is capable of. You know, like my SPR, the one that you were shooting a couple months ago or whatever, like that's probably a solid like 3/4 minute gun, like shooting, you know, 77 grain. If I feed it like whatever that bulk like Russian shit is that we have up there, like that legitimately will open up to like 6 MOA sometimes. Like, so it's the same rifle, but you change one aspect of the components and all of a sudden your performance is just gone. And so now, like, obviously that's probably the most extreme case because that ammo is horrible. But even, you know, let's say they get like something, you know, cheaper that's running like maybe 2 MOA, like, are you going to get the most out of it? I mean, you can get something out of it. You can learn some aspects, but when you start going out to distance, when you're at, you know, 400, 500, 600 yards and you're missing, it's like, well, is it a bad wind call? Oh, you don't know. It could be like your ammo. You could have made a good wind call. Maybe you just edged off the plate because your ammo sucks. So the money that you thought you saved, like by buying the cheap ammo, ended up just costing you more. Where if you just paid the price for a 77 grain federal gold medal match, write that down.
Yeah, best factory ammo you can get.
If you spend the money on that, you will get every ounce you can get out of whatever training you're actually doing. And it's a hard buy. And the other option is like, all right, well, I don't want to pay $2 a round or whatever it is. I don't know what 77 grain is right now. So you're like, well, I'm going to shop around. I'm going to try a bunch of different types of ammo. Well, by the time you get done trying all these different types of ammo, like if you just paid for the 77 grain federal gold medal match, you would have been like one and done. Yeah. I also know that some people love tinkering with stuff, so I fucking get it. Like if you want to tinker with it, like some people, like that's their hobby. But honestly, when it comes to like training and setting yourself up for success, like there are like known things that like if you do, like you're probably going to be all right. Ammo being one of those. Like let's buy good quality match ammo. If you're trying to do like precision stuff, it makes a difference. But
it does. Quite a bit, especially with 5.56.
Yeah.
600 yards, even with good wind calls. Like you guys had that nice grassy patch. You could see the wind pulling. We had like a 7 mile an hour crosswind. A little switchy, but what fucking blew my mind that day is my elevation was always good. I hated it. My fucking dope was perfect on that. And that ammo was weird. It was never like high or low. It was always just wind. But, it was the left to right accuracy of that ammo, not the elevation.
Those targets didn't have a lot of vertical in them too, so that's probably definitely getting more hit percentages on the vertical than the left and right. But
yeah,
yeah, ammo's a tricky thing, and same thing. I mean, the good thing is like with rifles nowadays. I mean, 2022 is an awesome time to be alive. Like most factory guns, like your factory blasters, are probably, if you feed it good match ammo, legitimately probably capable of a minute to a minute and a half. Like there's a lot of wonky stuff that goes into, like you're talking about like rails. Like so is this the pitfalls for anybody who's listening? So rails that are like ultra lightweight rails that are too thin, they start flexing. And like a lot of people don't realize that in order to have an ultralight rail, you're basically removing metal somewheres. Most of the time, it's going to be kind of in the rail or at the barrel nut. So if you have like a weak ass barrel nut and you start putting, tension on that rail, like whether you're loading in the bipods or a barricade, you're going to cause a shift because you're changing the amount of tension that's actually in the barrel nut, which is keeping your barrel in the receiver. And I see it all the time. Daniel Defense, some of their lightweight rails are probably the worst that I've seen. Especially like their large frame gas guns. They're super lightweight, but like I've literally seen almost 4 inches of shift, like at 100 yards, literally just going from prone onto a tripod. And you're just changing the amount of pressure on the rail. And even though it's a free floating rail, like it's still, you're getting a vertical shift. So that sort of thing, mounts and stocks are probably like currently my 2 biggest pet peeves. Everybody wants to go high, like in their mounts, like everybody's like 193, 204, even like the 225, like the Unity, like fast mounts, like even for like red dot stuff, like these mounts are going up, which is fine, like, but if your mount goes up, your face needs to go up with it. And so that's the missing piece that like so many people are getting. It doesn't matter if you're running a red dot carbine or you're running an SPR, the fundamentals matter. And I specifically speak to this for like red dot carbine sort of stuff. So when we're running like our recce course or our combative carbine, I see it all the freaking time, guys running like super high mounts, but they have like a standard height stock. And so when they're trying to zero, their head is like literally fucking floating. And then when you actually put them on a B8, they'll wander all over the black of a B8 at 50. I'm like, you should be like burning out like the X-ring. And so what's happening is their head's in a slightly different position every single freaking shot, and it just goes right around. And I'm like, okay, you need to take the same fundamental principles. The fundamentals don't ever change. You have to have a gun that's set up correctly in order to match like your body position, in order to create sight alignment, sight picture. And then that just feeds into, I mean, even when we get SPRs, it becomes even that much more important. But guys going too high in the mounts or having stocks that aren't like working for them are like, they're the easiest things to fix, but like, people don't know or they don't believe it. I see a lot of guys like they work things out like in their head how it should be, backed by like, they're like, oh, I've looked at like this zero concept and I run it in a ballistic computer and it sounds good. And I'm like, but you haven't actually shot this like in real life. Trust me, like you're gonna want to probably readjust like your thought process on this when you get into the real world. But yeah, the equipment pieces, they're such small things sometimes, but they can make such a big difference. Like it's the small things that end up kind of mattering over time. So like you have to go through everything kind of like with like your intention and your focus and be somewhat meticulous about it. And sometimes it's just a learning process. Sometimes you're just not going to know everything. So.
Right. Well, I mean, like I switched over to that 170 Badger. I got 31s. I got that adjustable comb. It's so comfortable. Like people are like, oh, I need higher because of night vision because this dork on Instagram who's a drop culture page said this is the way to go. And, we make 193 mounts. For me, a 193 is kind of a sweet spot for some things. It depends what I'm doing. Like like I did notice when I did your night operator course 2 years ago and I was running a 166, which is 166 is our standard height for our Ukon optic mounts. And it's our own height. We went a little higher than the traditional mounts, a little lower than the 193s. 166. I ran a great course of fire those 2 nights with my Noveske 10 and a half. I'm lasing out to 200, 300 yards with my gun with my maul, passively shooting, getting impacts. I was running good ammo in that class. I was getting impacts with a 10.5 inch gun, and I was happy. And then we were on the B8s and stuff under nods. I was punching nice golf balls and whatever. I'm getting behind, and this is a 166 with 31s, and I was very comfortable and happy. And what I've noticed too with like social media and the influencers and stuff, 193 or higher is so important. And then you're starting to see that culture trickle into like the younger dudes in the soft units that are demanding that they need this 193 capability because, and a lot of people are, oh, are you going to make your Ukons 226s? Are you going to match Unity's height because of this or this magnifier? And I'm like, I mean, I can run a gun, a CQB gun, and I'm not a fucking operator type dude, but I like to practice and learn some of the capabilities. But I'm perfectly comfortable getting a little bit higher, the stock on my clavicle, a little bit higher, getting that cheek weld there and being able to line of sight through my tubes passive, and it's fucking fine. But then again, you get these dudes that are running higher ones, and there were some dudes running like super high mounts in that class, and they looked like they were good shooters, and their groups are opening up. And then when Alex goes down the line and scores, I'm scoring really high in all these courses of fire. So I did switch over to 193 for some of my platforms just because if it's, I guess the AR-15 is probably the highest, like between stock height through barrel and receiver is higher. Like MCXs, they drop a little bit. So like 166s work great. Or if you're running... certain platforms, the stock to Picatinny rail, you do have a little bit more of an offset. So running a 166 is actually quite good compared to an AR-15 where, the charging handle is only a 1/4 inch above the buffer tube and that offset's really tight. But I was talking to Kyle Lamb. He's like, I don't know why they're going so high. He's like, we got it done with way wonkier night vision back in the day.
That's what kills me about it is like everybody thinks like that high mounts is like a new thing. I'm like, bro, we were there like when it first happened. Like we've already been down this road. It wasn't great. Like it had its benefits, which were notable, but the balance point is, again, if you go high, your face has to go with it. Back then, there wasn't a lot of options for like coming up. So if you went to a high mount, it was a compromise. Like your ability to affect any sort of like precise fires was somewhat limited, which is why you saw a lot of guys in order to actually really have like a full spectrum carbine. Like we kind of went back to like the 1.54, the 1.7s. So it's not to say that it doesn't work. There wasn't aspects. It was too much of a compromise for a lot of us. Like when we started back in 06, going to the high mounts, trying to get over fucking PEC 2s and stuff on short little, nice rails. So going back now we have the ability, like we have good stocks, but like people are like, they're missing. They don't understand the context of what they're doing. They're just like, oh man, higher's better because so-and-so said it. Well, yes, but you still need to bring the fundamentals with you to be successful. Otherwise, you're back at square one where we were in 2005, 2006. So you could do it that way, or you can just listen to everybody that's already done this. What I'm saying is not like revolutionary. Like if you talk to anybody, like anybody who was there before, like everybody's like, oh yeah, it's the same thing. But yet here we are. I don't even know what the high mounts are now. 2.6s.
226s, yeah.
It's so fucking laughable when I see this. I'm just like, it's gonna get a point now. I remember this way back in the day from like AR15.com. Remember like the Beowulf X mount?
Yes.
Yeah, it's coming back. And I wish I had bought that mount back then. It was stupid then, but now it's just gonna be absolute fucking parody.
We make a 226 riser for EOTechs, but we made it because the Unity fast Picatinny to Picatinny riser was pretty much only suited for lower thirds optics, and so ours, because the insert, you can remove it and you can run lower thirds and absolute witness up to that height, because Unity does have the market on higher magnifiers. But again, it's, I'm seeing like higher mounts, but then people put in cheek welds, like a Slay Raider has a rearward. It reminds me of the LaRue CTR stock, but his is more rearward, and it does make sense having it rearward. So if you run a 193 and you're running tubes, like the one thing with the LaRue is it sits a little bit more forward. So if you are, trying to get your fundamentals in there, you might clack tubes against, whatever. So having it back there higher up, when you bring the gun up, it's now out of the way and it creates that gap between your 193 and your tubes. That makes sense to me. Yeah. And that's bringing your head up so that you are achieving what you're trying to do. And that makes total sense. And it's a simple 3D printed mod or whatever that fits the CTR stocks too. But, now I'm looking at my CTR LaRue stocks going, well, am I going to put these on all my taller guns now? Because it makes sense. If I'm running a 193, why shouldn't I do that? It worked a little bit on my special purpose rifle, but again, the 193 is too high. The 166, when I took that night operators course, when we did the proned out course of fire up the hill, this was back when you guys hadn't, a perfectly leveled area. So where we were proning out was aimed down. Yeah. We were proned out, aiming down, and now we're our body is aimed down, but now we're shooting up. So if I had a slightly taller, like a 193, that one position might have been a little bit more comfortable for me, but that's about it. Everything else would have,
Yeah, that dirt pile wasn't the optimal dirt pile.
No, but I see it all the time in PRS matches where we're shooting out to distance, and distance is usually up. We're shooting more inline rather than down at a lot of these courses of fire, and for some reason they put you in the shittiest prone position. It's not a fucking level prone position. It's always something that's down.
Well, why should it be anything?
No, I know, exactly. But it's sometimes I'm like, why can't we just have the opposite? Just once, or they'll put a mat down and then you'll watch all the guys put their bipod in front of the mat because they don't want to fuck the mat up. And then as they're shooting, their bipod's sinking into the dirt, and then you see their shots start to suffer. And I'm like, it's a prop mat. I'm digging my cleats into it. I'm gonna load this bipod. This thing's not, I'm gonna go no hands. This thing's not gonna move. Shouldn't have put it there. I'm gonna fuck it up.
It's not your problem.
It's not my problem. Use the prop, beat it up, fuck it. But dude, mounts are so interesting. It's so fucking, we designed our original Anvil Ukon for the RMR for the Rattler for a couple of units, and because of that differential to center of the stock versus where the Picatinny sits, it's perfect for getting real tight fundamental behind the Rattler. But then you get dudes that throw them on AR-15 PDWs, and they're like, this is too low. And I was like, I know, because it was designed it was designed for monolithic railed MCX style guns. It works well on like the Strybog, the B&Ts that have that big differential. Same thing. It works great on those guns. But then the dudes are slapping them on ARs, and they're like, well, this sucks. And I'm like, well, throw a low AMD quick throw on there, and there you go. Now you get your height. You know, now you have the capability plus height, and it's quick disconnect. But now you're tolerant stacking Picatinny. You could, questionable if you want to use your backup irons for like a true windage. But anyway, moot point. You know what's cool about our riser though? The riser that we just came out with? It's so lightweight. And my buddy, he's down in Texas hunting hogs, and he was like, dude, my clip-on is an absolute witness clip-on, thermal. And I want to run a 193. Now with your riser, I can set it perfectly to get my clip-on in line with my... And I was like, man, that's an application I didn't know that it could work great, because again, we designed it for absolute witness, not lower thirds. But that insert, you know, we mathed it after machining, and you pull that insert out, you can get lower thirds to the right height. And to 224, it's not quite 226, but it still works with magnifiers and what you need to line up with. But yeah, he's like, dude, this is the sickest mount ever, because now I can get all my clip-ons in line with my 193s. And I'm like, can you do a video on that so we can like talk about it? Because that's cool.
Yeah, no, that's super convenient. It's always fun like trying to line up clip-ons. And clip-ons, I mean, typically have like a lot of fudge into them. You know, people kind of sweat like having everything lined up, but that's one of the problems is when you start going up, it's like, okay, now how do I bring everything else up with it?
I love seeing the fucking self-adhesive tape, and you can see the clip-on versus the glass is completely not perfectly aligned, but it's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, you can get away with a lot. Like, maybe not like lower quality units, but like any of like the night stuff, like, or the CMVDs, you know, like even like some of the new thermals and stuff we're running, like PVS, like, not PVS, what am I thinking of? iNod, whatever that is. iNod and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be, like, it can be pretty freaking close and still work out just fine. But yeah, it is nice to kind of have like a full field of view if you can. Like, it always geeks me out a little bit when I'm just like, I'm just like not quite there. So
I wish I had a reason to buy a very expensive clip-on thermal.
Yeah, I think they're going to get cheaper and cheaper. I'm actually really excited. Like next 10 years, I think you're going to see like thermal become cheaper than our current like IR spectrum stuff, or you're going to start to see probably some I-squared stuff coming out. But honestly, I think that's the way of the future. Like professionally, I do almost everything thermal now, like for like a UNS system. Like it is, the technology is fucking mind-blowing now at this point. Like the capabilities like did not exist. You know, a lot of people think thermal, if you were in any beginning parts of like the early GY, you know, you're thinking like, you know, the fucking PAS 13s and stuff like that. Like the new stuff is, I mean, it's fucking futuristic. It's fucking badass. And I think it's only just gonna get cheaper and cheaper. Even the years, I remember like when the Hiss XLR like first came out, and like they were so expensive. You literally like ordered like made, like they weren't just on a shelf somewhere. Now like that stuff is like, it's so much more available. I mean, it's still expensive, but I think if you give it time, I think you're going to see thermal is going to overtake like your standard UNS stuff, like nods, which I think is awesome. I'm excited about it.
Do you like clip-on night vision?
Yeah, that's definitely like if you're doing like any sort of long range stuff, like 100%, like that's the way to go. Like for carbine stuff, I still roll just normal laser. You know, your typical laser illuminator, like a MAL or like the NGAL or things like that, or the Raid, like those are easily going to get you like, you know, even with like LPVO, like easy, you know, 400 or 500 yards. So the new stuff though, like if you're pushing long range, like even some of like the new stuff, the older stuff, like the CMVDs or the 24 LRs and stuff, like those things are awesome. Like good light conditions, you know, there's a lot of variables. What do you got for illuminator? What are the light conditions? But those are going to be like your best platforms, like for actually getting out to distance. They're pretty awesome technology. I love that shit. That's
what
the way
are
to
they,
go.
17s or 19s? PVS, which one's a clip-on night vision?
So the clip-on, so there's a lot of different like
I know
mill
I'm just trying to
clip-ons,
think of
but-
one specific because a buddy's showing up with one.
So you have basically the 22s, 24s, 24 LRs, 27s, 29s, 30s. That's kind of like the full spectrum from like when I kind of came in. Like we were just getting rid of like the Simrez and things like that. The past 10 or the PVS 10s.
Gross.
Those things were the worst. I fucking hate those things. And hopefully they're all destroyed somewhere. I don't ever want to see a
Whatever
PVS 10.
the one my buddy's bringing me, it's got an older green tube in it, but it's the same tubes that are in like the same spec dimensional tubes and in logic inside that could take white phos. So I'm like, I might just buy it off him and then swap tubes, upgrade it because it'll take it. And my buddy can swap the tubes for me. So I'm like, maybe I'll just do that because I could save money and still have like a fucking clip-on that was operational back in the day and upgrade it. But yeah, I don't have anything super high-end for thermal. I do run a 30 millimeter Pulsar XP50 Thermion on my hunting guns, and that thing's fucking tight. It has a self-recording option. The zero is cool because it's a freeze frame zero. So you only have to take one shot at a piece of cardboard and you can see the witness of the bullet. But you do have to zero it to whatever magnification you zero it on, which kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But when I'm hunting pigs, I can be magged out and fucking swat things.
Still hit a vital.
So, but yeah, I shoot it at I think it starts at 6 power. So I zero it at 6 power. I can see the little glowing moon on cardboard on my 50 yard. And then I hit freeze. And it freezes the image. And then you hit 0 and the crosshair changes. And then you just move the crosshair to the point of impact, unfreeze, and then shoot another shot. And it's usually going through the hole.
Well, that's pretty cool. That's a nice feature.
It's a nice feature. You might have to tailor it a little bit because it's not quite perfect, or when you pressed it, you jiggled the image or something like that. So usually within 3 shots of high-end hunting ammo, I'm fucking zeroed. And it's rad. It records audio and everything, and the batteries last quite a bit. It has a display off, which is what kills most of the battery. Does have parasitic battery drain over like a week, but it's not bad. And it's a rad little lightweight. I have it on an AMD double quick throw, and you can save your old zeros. So it has a library of your zeros. So like I have like my Bren 2 7.62, my Honey Badger, my...
Speaking of which, Bren 2, one of the most disappointing rifles that I've shot probably in the last like
5.56?
5 years. Yeah.
5.56 sucks.
I have not been too impressed with the 7.62 either.
I have all the mill ones, like the mill issued machine guns. I like the 8.5 inch 7.62 by 39. It's great for helicopter hog hunting. It's lightweight. I mean, I've killed a lot of fucking animals with it. But yeah, it's a gassy little pig.
It's like super overgassed, and the accuracy I've seen so far has been disappointing.
Well,
Doesn't take a lot to disappoint me, but
yes. Well, you know why it's overgassed?
disappointing.
Because when the original system was developed, suppressors were illegal for any use in Czech Republic except for high-end mill. So they didn't build any guns suppressor ready, even though the U.S. market was begging them for it. CZUB is kind of fucking stupid, and they're like, nah, well, we can't have them, so you can't have gas guns correctly. So like HB Industries does sell replacement gas valves for suppression for the different weapon systems, and then I'm running a OSS 7.62 can on my 7.62 by 51 machine gun, only one in the country. Flex, fuck it.
Oh, big deal.
Big deal. And it's not, like you said, it's not the most accurate gun. It's like a minute and a half gun. It's
That's
not,
a better than what I've seen out of a lot of guns coming through.
but that's it's probably a little bigger than that, just running like mil SERP 762x51. But if I was running gold medal master, it probably could tighten it up a bit. But with that, again, doesn't have an adjustable gas block. It has like standard and adverse. It doesn't have suppressed, but it does have a 0 gas function, which you could mill out and gas tune. So you could gas tune it. But I want to take that hunting. That's going to be like a little bit longer distance. But the nice thing about that OSS can, man, it fucking makes a big difference. Less gas at the shooter. So you almost have to run a high flow can on those guns. So the new SIGs, the SLXs would be great for it. And the Hucks or whatever fucking OSS is now. Next time I come up and you're teaching a class, I'll bring that gun with me so we can
We'll see if we improve my opinion of it. But I just, yeah.
30
I was
round.
shocked. I wanted it to be something, but it has not proven.
The mags are nice. They're 30 round SR25 magazine style at the base, but they're 30 round mags and they're only like a half inch longer than SR25 20 rounders, which is kind of nice.
It's pretty sick.
Yeah, so it is kind of sick. But yeah, I gotta fuck with it a little bit more, but that's gonna be my next pig hunt in Texas, bringing that gun. Get a little bit more oomph. A little more distance.
That'll probably do well in that role.
Shoot an Axis or something with it. Shot an Axis with a SIG 762 by 39 Swiss SIG with a clip on. They didn't. The gun wasn't zeroed. I spined the poor guy.
Jesus Christ.
Had to finish it. It went quick. It was only 40 yards. It was a quick run. Did I ever show you the pictures of me trying to pose with it and I sat in a fucking cactus? And so my buddy's...
Sounds like karma.
My buddy Steve, dude, that was my boxers when he was like, herd of Axis coming in. My gun's packed up. I'm supposed to leave at 7 o'clock in the morning. And he's holding the antlers and he's like rubbing my butt, my bare ass to pull thorns out. And there's a photo of him rubbing my butt and he's holding the antler here. It looks like he's about to stab me with it. But I will never own a Jeep after that trip because I left the key fob on the hood with the car and it was talking the whole time, so it killed the main battery, and they have a secondary battery under the main battery that prevents you from jumping it to another car. So it has an emergency electric lockout, and the only way to get it is actually booster pack the car. Like actually have a power pack that can override both batteries to jump it. So we're supposed to go to the airport. It was fine because I got to end up, I spent the whole day actually breaking down my animal, completely vacuum packing it and getting it ready to bring with me. So
You got that out of it, I guess.
got that in. But yeah, dude, fuck. Anyway, fuck Jeeps.
Yeah, I hate like modern cars so fucking much now, like, because we deal with a lot, we do a lot of stuff with O'Neill, so there's a lot of shooting stuff. Things that we have to do to vehicles when they come over so we can shoot and drive them and crash them into stuff. And there's so much that can go wrong, like with all the computerization. I fucking hate it. Like, I hate it so much. I'm not a big computer guy, but like...
And left foot braking.
Yeah, like a lot of like cars now, you won't even let you like do stuff. Like, you gotta you pull stuff, and then you're like, well, this pulls this, but what else am I pulling from here? So like, I'm not a fan of
ABS
computers.
systems are shit. Like I had to pull my fuse in my Tacoma. I have a 2014 6-speed manual, and when I switched over to bigger tires because they're softer, knobbier, a little bit more weight, even on wet pavement, I'd be tripping TCS, and my ABS would fire in an inch of snow, and I'm like, what the fuck? So I had to pull my sensor, and that's a known issue with those. Pull my fuse. But in 2011, Toyota switched over you can't left foot brake in their cars because, someone accidentally hit the brake with their left foot while gassing or something, and some lady got their foot stuck, so they disabled it because of something. It's like a lady died, and it was like her flip-flop got stuck under her left foot, got stuck under the brake and caused an accident, so they started disabling all the fucking left foot braking. And I did try it once on soft medium, and my fucking vehicle lit up like a Christmas tree. Everything locked
Just freaked out.
I'm just like, what wire and it's not a fuse, it's a wire, so I need to figure out how to cut it, but I'll probably have to tune it out. But fuck left foot braking in a fucking truck.
Yeah, apparently. I mean, it does work, but if you have the ability to do that. But yeah, modern cars, computers. Computers are the devil, bro. The worst.
Oh yeah. So, Rudy, you said that if you Google search your name, psychedelics comes up.
Yes.
Why?
Why? Oh, that's a complicated question, for sure. Why does it come up? Well, I guess I've had a very interesting journey through my life. So, I mean, so you kind of know like just a little bit of like my background, like kind of what I've gone through. So it was kind of like around like the 2016 period, like when I left like active duty. Again, like I was hitting a pretty freaking good burnout at that point. I had several combat deployments at that point, and honestly, just had like a lot of, I'm gonna say like, there's a lot of stuff that was just going on in my life that I had not really dealt with, and those things can like totally like catch up with you. Like my practice of like just kind of stuffing like events like into things and compartmentalizing. This is a pretty common thing that a lot of people do, but it turns out that it's actually not really good for you to do that. And so by about that time in my life, pretty much started like having like a lot of like issues start coming up, and some of it is compounded with just what we call like post-traumatic stress, compounded with traumatic brain injuries and things like that. I think I mentioned that how much I love hard target interdiction and 50 cals. I also love mortars. I love Carl Gustavs, but they don't love me back.
How many rounds per day through a 50 cal
so,
that people don't realize?
Things I found out later in life. Actually, that's not true. I was actually briefed on this when I went through sniper school the first time. They're only allowed to do 100 rounds in a 24-hour period. I would routinely, in my downtime in Afghanistan, I'd do an entire box of Rafis, which is about 120 rounds, in an afternoon. I think my record, I went through like 3, I'll never forget that. We had a Spendex once. This was not a deployment. This was like a range day. At a company Spendex, and I think I personally went through about 350 rounds in an afternoon through 107. Like I said, like Carl Gustavs, I think my record for that is like 22 in a day. Don't do these things, kids. They're not good for you.
So you've had a lot of micro concussions.
So micro is a mild choice. But yeah, I had a lot of injuries, blast injuries, fight injuries, like that stuff, it can add up. And it's a really difficult thing to predict. Obviously, like doing stuff like kind of like what I was doing. Sometimes you look at it as kind of like a necessity, but you always don't know the trade-off. And sometimes you get away with it. Like some people are good for 1,000 hits. Some people are good for 10,000. Some people are good for like 1 or 2 good ones. And like you don't know where your count's at. And so for me, like these things started adding up, so like by the time I left active duty, I was struggling quite a bit with like the post-traumatic stress like aspects of things. Like it was a rough time in my life, like I was really dealing with like social anxieties, depression, suicidal like idealization, things like that, like things that like people like are like, oh yeah, that's bad, but we don't actually talk about those things. And like those things had started kind of slowly creeping in, and it's for people who don't understand, like sometimes it's a very difficult thing to notice because it has a subtle creep, and then sometimes those things also have kind of like a wave pattern where like sometimes you'll be like, oh man, this fucking sucks, I should do something. And then it starts getting a little bit better. It doesn't start affecting you much. You're like, I got this totally under control. And then I also started running into some major cognitive issues during this period too. Like I would like get up in the morning and just be like so like fogged out in my brain, where it was like, if I could get my kids on the school bus, that was like a win for my day. I was like, fuck yeah. Like, and I remember at one point just being like, fuck man, like, why is life so fucking hard right now? Like, I'm a goddamn fucking Green Beret. Like, why is everyday life so hard for me? And just realizing that, like, holy shit, like, this isn't normal. Like, this isn't my normal where I'm at. And so I was like, I gotta do something, right? Like, I gotta do something. And so I went to the VA and went in for like my first meeting, and literally 15 minutes, they wanted to put me on like 3 different medications. I was like, fuck that shit, bro. Like, so I've known a lot of other guys that have gone down this road, and knowing what I kind of know now more about like the VA like medical model is like, they're not so much terribly interested in fixing you. That's honestly like a lot of like kind of like Western medicine isn't always necessarily like to try to fix you. It's just kind of like keep you at a steady pace, and you're just going to be on these meds for the rest of your life. The problem with like a lot of those meds, especially anxiety meds and antidepressant meds and stuff like that, is like it pretty much like wrecks everything else in your life in order to keep you at that like basically monotone level out point.
Sedated.
Yeah, basically you're sedated. I was like, fuck that, I'd rather die, bro. And so I just kind of kept on working and trying to work things out on my own, thinking it would be different. And like I said, it was just kind of like this seesaw. And it was something that was also kind of exacerbated. Drinking for me was definitely like a big problem. But I would say that like it wasn't like, definitely didn't meet like the classical definition of like alcoholism, but like I started noticing like when I would drink, like the brain fog would be worse, and I would get like super sad. Like it would literally be like 1 or 2 beers, and I'd wake up the next day like so freaking sad. And I was like, what is wrong with me? And I'd be like, fuck it, like I'm just gonna keep going. And then like anger too, like just like super short fuse, because obviously like with those issues, like you're in a fair degree amount of pain, you know, like, so a lot of times like the cognitive disruption comes from like inflammation, like within the brain, but also like other parts of your body too. I remember just like, I would get up every day and just be like, I get out of bed and just dad noises, like instantly, just like my back, like my knees, my hips, like everything just always kind of hurt. It wasn't like bad enough where like it would stop me, but like it sucked, you know, and like it kind of like played across into like every other part of my life. Then eventually I was just like, fuck it, man, I'm just gonna keep on going until whatever, and that's pretty much what I did until my wife left me. And that was like this it was this fascinating moment for me of just like when she kind of walked out, I was just basically like, I can't do this anymore. And like, it kind of left me with myself. Like I just had this epiphany that I was like, nobody else is here. Like, it's just me now. Like, and start having to take an accountability. It's like, okay, like this is your life. There's nobody else to blame, like, for this. Like, some people do. Some people are like, they fucked me. Like, the Army fucked me, the VA fucked me, my ex-wife fucked me, you know, like. But I don't know, for whatever reason, I was just like, okay, shit is fucked up right now, and I'm the only one that's really going to be able to fix this. And I didn't know, like, what I was going to do, but I was like, I need to do something. I have to do something. So I stopped drinking because I knew that was like kind of like, for me, I was like, this shit is fucking me up. It's affected me in a way that like it did not used to. And because in my younger years, I would fucking drink myself into oblivion and get up and run fucking 6 miles the next day and like feel like perfectly fucking fine. Thank you, Marine Corps, for that. So it was like something that I didn't really know what I was going to do. I knew that I didn't want to go on like the pharmaceutical route because I don't want to be sedated, and I knew that I couldn't stay there. Something had to change. And so somehow I ended up talking with a good friend of mine, a mentor of mine that when I first got out of active duty that I had worked under for a little while, and we ended up having a conversation one day. And he's a former Marine Corps scout sniper, like chief scout, and so I'm just telling him basically, hey man, let me tell you about my fucked up life right now. Like, this is where I'm at. I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do with all this. And he's like, bro, I'm gonna tell you something that's gonna sound fucking crazy, but he's like, I just want you to hear this out. And just proceeds to tell me about going to Peru and doing like psychedelics like in the jungle. And I'm like, mind you, like, I've never like smoked weed or fucking anything. Like, I was pretty much straight as the arrow, like kind of growing up. And I'm like, bro, that is fucking crazy. But I'm also like, this is a dude that I really respect. You know, he's a fucking hitter. And I'm like, well, dude, that's fucking crazy. Well, it might just be crazy enough to work. And it kind of like planted like this like seed in my mind. And so I started like kind of contemplating this. I'm like, you know, what's going on here? And so I started kind of doing like research, and I ended up finding a group called Heroic Hearts Project. So it's started by this dude, Jesse Gould. So he's a former Ranger. He's a Rangerback guy. And basically their mission is to kind of like make available like psychedelic therapy available to veterans. They're kind of working through stuff like that. So basically they have like a whole vetting process. They have a coaching both before and after. And a lot of what they focus on, the psychedelic that is pretty common that they send guys with is ayahuasca. So a lot of times it's usually like South America orientation, where basically they vetting dudes, they vet sites, they vet like the people that are there, make sure everything is like kind of level, and then they help facilitate basically these trips. Because for those people who aren't really maybe familiar with psychedelics, like I wasn't either, like when I first started this journey, I'm like, what is going on here? Basically ayahuasca is this brew that's kind of home to like the indigenous people of like the Amazon. So it's a medicine that they've been using for like pretty much thousands of years, and it's a blend between basically a vine and a leaf and a couple other stuff. And so the leaf contains dimethyltryptamine, which is DMT, as most people know. Then the vine has an MUA inhibitor, so it allows basically DMT to cross like these the blood-brain barrier. So it creates basically this experience. And so this medicine is used traditionally. There's a couple different ways that it's used depending on which tribes you're kind of looking at, but it's usually used in kind of like a ceremonial practice of like kind of going like into yourself in order to kind of unlock yourself, to basically work into yourself. And so it has like this therapeutic use to it. And so it does a lot of other interesting things too. Like, so obviously there's a couple different aspects that we look at it, like if you're looking at it from a medicine aspect. So one is being able to kind of like go inside of like your own mind and kind of like sort stuff out. So one of the ways it does this is, so like DMT, like it kind of links to like your serotonin receptor in your brain. And it actually like kind of momentarily shuts off certain parts of your brain. So when you ingest this, it begins to shut down what we call like the default mode network, which is responsible for kind of like how you perceive yourself in the world. And it kind of allows you a different perspective. And this different perspective, it kind of have like some disassociation of like some of these traumatic events that you might be revisiting. And it can be incredibly useful for like kind of working through something without being like actual attached to the event. So like a lot of times in these ceremonies, like you'll obviously be tripping your balls off in the jungle, but like you're kind of sometimes reliving. There's a lot of different experiences. Every experience is a little bit different, but you're reliving it, but sometimes you're reliving it like from a third party perspective. And like, you're like, okay, like I can see everything is playing out.
Like almost out of body?
Sometimes it's almost out of body. Like, so I've had like experiences that are kind of like Ghost of Christmas Past, where like I'm literally like watching things, like this, you know, entity is like taking me like into like this event, and like we pause and like freeze frame it and like kind of talk about like, well, this is what was going on here. And also sometimes living that event through the perspective of other people that were there. It's pretty trippy. But what I found there is like it's incredibly useful for like kind of processing stuff that sometimes it's difficult to get to, you know, like
you're blocking it out. Your mind is blocked out. You're disassociating. There's so many people that don't realize they disassociate so much these days, and they put up those mental walls, and so this sounds like it's just breaking it down.
Yeah, so it's basically like dissociation is exactly it. Like, and that's commonly what happens when you have in some sort of event. We call it traumatic, but it's really any event that like basically bumps like the chemicals in your brain over a certain level. And that's what trauma technically is. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Trauma can be all sorts of different things, but once you break that threshold, you know, then your body wants to compartmentalize the event in certain ways, which is useful, but like there's different parts of like our bodies. And so like that memory and that like tension is still stored there, and it can completely like throw off all these other things in your life from like a chemical like imbalance point of view, which tends to manifest itself in anxiety, depression, and things like that. And there's a certain part of your body that like wants to revisit and process that, which is why you might have things like, you have like the classic like flashback, you know, that a lot of people might be familiar with when you're thinking of PTSD. Not everybody has like flashbacks and stuff like that, but that's like one of the things is you're trying to revisit it. But your body doing like its natural evolutionary thing is like, nope, bad thing. We need to keep everybody else safe from it. We're going to compartmentalize this and not give you access to it. And so that's what like this is kind of allowing you to do in some ways, is it shuts down certain parts of your brain and gives you basically access back to yourself to process that stuff. It's also doing kind of some other really interesting things. So I went with a group of different veterans. So it's myself, there's another Marine, there's a Ranger dude there, dude from the 82nd. We had two dudes from British SAS and two Canadian soft dudes who went down there. It was really interesting to see kind of like the automatic like change that kind of just began to occur like in everybody, like literally from day one. So we did 4 ceremonies that were there over the course of about a week, and it allows you to kind of open up to yourself. And sometimes it's, interestingly enough, it's not always the things that you think it is. Like, I honestly thought I was going to go down there and like be like fucking war shit, fucking take care of war shit. That was like maybe the first like 15 minutes of like my first like 8-hour trip was that. And then, I mean, I went fucking back like to like childhood shit, because a lot of like things that happened then end up beginning shaping your life and shaping the trajectory of life that leads you to, you know, things that are happening, you know, on the other side of the world in your 30s. And so it was really interesting to see it from that perspective. But while we were also there, so there's University of Georgia was there and University of Colorado was there doing some research projects basically. The University of Colorado was heavily focused on doing like gut biomes. They're taking like stool samples and stuff when you're there. Because some of the other things that this ayahuasca is doing is it's changing like your biochemistry, your flora and fauna, like in your gut, which is heavily connected to like your nervous system. So probably maybe you've heard like the concept of the brain being, or the gut being like the second brain.
Yep.
Because like so much of what's happening like inside of your guts directly affects what's happening like in your brain as far as like management and suppression of like the nervous system. And it makes a ton of sense like in a lot of ways, because you know, you think about like some of us, like we go overseas and like you're eating just like fucked up food. Like if you've ever eaten like MREs for like 6 to like 10 month deployments, like that shit fucks your gut up like hardcore. Like I used to have so many fucking issues like coming back, switching like kind of back to like real food and stuff. But like a lot of that, if it starts getting out of balance, like it can throw off like all like your brain chemistry in conjunction with that. So if the ayahuasca in a lot of ways like flushes like all that. So if anybody's kind of remotely familiar with ayahuasca, so a lot of times there's what we call purging involved. Normally it comes like in the form of like vomiting or like shitting yourself. That's fucking awesome.
While tripping.
Yeah, while tripping. So
are you even focused on the bodily fluids coming out while tripping, or does it just kind of...
Sometimes, yeah. Like
you're like, oh, I'm shitting myself.
So a lot of times, like for me, I never shit myself, but like the vomiting was like, it was weird because it was part of like the actual psychedelic experience where I could feel like this hand, like the hand of like this ayahuasca, like grabbing something inside of me. And I could tell it was like this, I don't know, like this dark, like black fucking goo. And like once it had a hold of it, it was like, all right, fucking vomit. And like, bro, I've done some serious vomiting in my days, but nothing like this. Like
it's like Fern Gully shit.
Oh, dude, it was fucking, it was fucking wild, man. Like that vomiting was like I said, as soon as I had a hold of it, it was so weird because like my body, you know, like sometimes when you're drunk, it's almost like your body lags behind like your brain.
Yeah.
With I found it like my brain would lag behind my body, and like literally I was like, oh man, I don't feel good. And then like I realized like my body had already grabbed like a bucket and like put it in front of me. It was like, you're gonna need this. And I was like, oh, thanks, buddy. And like I just remember like just being at like the edge of this mat. And it's like nighttime, so the shamans that like I worked with, so they're from the Shibok tribes. They do all their ceremonies are at night. And so it's dark and I'm at the edge of this mat and like I'm like looking down in this bucket and it just disappears. It's like this fucking abyss. And I'm just like looking at the edge of the abyss and I'm just like, fuck man, it's a long ways down. And then like I feel like the hand like grab this stuff and it's like, all right, fucking go. And I was like, ugh. I just start like this heave and like I've never felt like I could feel like every muscle like in my body like just tensing and convulsing. And as I start to heave, and like I remember in my head I was like, I hope the bucket is still there somewhere, so this is gonna be a mess tomorrow. And like so I'm puking into this abyss, and like out of this abyss comes like this psychedelic kraken, and it's like grabs my fucking face, and like I'm vomiting, like it's got like this little beak, I'm like vomiting like all this black dark goo of like this emotional psychological fucking goo like into this fucking kraken. And so like that happens and then I'm done, like I'm fucking empty. And I'm just like the most amazing feeling ever, like just like letting like all of that go. And so I was just like, man, I don't know what the fuck that was, but that was like some fucking like that connection, like just like the psychological releasing like of something.
And why a kraken?
I don't know, man. Like,
is that like your call sign now, or?
Dude, I don't know, but it was fucking wild. So like what that does though, so it's basically cleaning out your gut, right? So you're basically pushing like a hard reset on like your gut biome. So because a lot of like the preparation going into Aya and coming out of it, if you're kind of doing it right, usually is associated with what's called like a diete. So you're going through different types of foods, and it starts to become more and more restrictive because what you're feeding yourself has a huge impact on what can actually grow in there. So you start getting like this reset. I mean, you do several nights of that, and it's a pretty good freaking reset of what's inside, which is a big part of like kind of like healing that part. And then other things that are occurring, things that they've started to note is like there's still some interesting research that I think they're still kind of looking at it, but one of the things that happens when the default mode network shuts down and you're having some of these thoughts, because like your normal like lanes of like your thought patterns between your neurons start shutting down, you end up actually rerouting. So you end up rerouting like through new neurons. So a lot of times like when you have like trauma, whether it's from like a stressful situation or even like the CTEs where you're actually breaking like neuron chains and stuff like that, what you sometimes get is like neurons that just keep on firing. It fires like in a loop. And so this could create like a logic loop that you can't quite get out of. So when it comes to like trying to like solve like your problems like and that you're having in everyday life and you're like, fuck man, I just can't seem to like figure this out, or like I just keep on having like this issue, like this memory that I can't get over, like that's what it is. It's just
looping.
Yeah, it's just looping. And so when the default mode network shuts down, a lot of times like those loops go offline. And so when they go offline, your brain starts to rewire through a different pathway. And that's what actually gives, I think, the different perspective. Like you're literally rewiring like part of your brain to experience that event, but in a slightly different way. So those are like kind of like the insides of like what like this, like I said, medicine is kind of like doing for you. And it's fucking intense. You know, it's not for everyone, you know, like everybody that went like, you know, through like the Heroic Hearts Project, you know, go through kind of like a screening, you know, like, because there are certain medications you can't be on. And honestly, there's certain people that, depending on kind of where you're at, like emotionally and psychologically, you obviously wouldn't want to be doing this.
Too much of a dive for some people.
Yeah, for some people. I mean, it's intense. So I think from like from like the spiritual aspect of it, I guess I think that's what might be a good word to describe it, the experiential. It's quite literally like a journey, which is part of like why I think it works so well, especially for veterans. A lot of times, you know, you look at the process of going to do this. I can remember like the first ceremony I sat in, and it's dark out, and I'm sitting in front of like this little brown dude, and he hands me like this fucking shot glass of this fucking eye, which looks like, if you've ever seen like dip spit mixed with like hot sauce, that's about the consistency of it. That's about what it tastes like too. It's gross. And you know, just sitting there in the dark, and I'm just like, what fucking crazy events in my life have led me to fly halfway around the world to sit in the jungle with like some dude like and take like psychedelics and trip my balls off. Like
Clearly enough, but to get there, like, I mean, it's a process. Like you have to want it to a certain degree, right? And I think sometimes people have a misconception of it being like kind of like a silver bullet, you know, because it's not. Like all the Aya does is like it unlocks yourself to yourself so you can go inside. And I think that's part of like the struggles. You don't know like what's going to be in there. You, to a certain degree, you know. And I think a lot of people experience this and realizing you're like, fuck, man, there's some dark shit in there. Yeah,
and like,
you have to revisit it.
You're going to have to revisit it. You don't know what's coming up, but you know what's coming. And I had a journey like this. This was like my third experience in my ceremony that I had. And like my first two ceremonies were pretty fucking awesome, minus like the cracking stuff, but like everything else was fucking good ass fucking trip. And then like the night of like my third ceremony, I just got these vibes. I was like, bro, we're going into the fucking shadows tonight. And I was like, I'm fucking scared, bro. Like, because you know, like even if you can't necessarily pinpoint it, everybody knows the shadow that's like inside of themselves. And like some guys have done some fucking shit. And it's fucking scary because you're like, man, I don't even know what else is in there. Like, but I know that's at least in there, and I know there's something else beyond it, and do I want to let that out? You know,
right.
And a lot of guys have a hard time with that, like letting go, because it's scary, because they know the beast that's in there. And there's not really a lot of space for that. And I think in our culture, like letting these parts of us that came out for like a lot of us veterans that came out like in those experiences in combat, like you start to see the shadow, you start to see the beast that's inside of you, and it's like, fuck bro, like we're gonna keep that guy locked up. And so the Aya like takes away some of your control over that. And it's pretty intense to be able to say, I'm gonna go into that. But to do so, like you have to let go. Like you have to take the step across the threshold, which it's like a part of this journey process, which relating it back to like veterans, why I think like ceremonies and healing like this is so relevant for us is we're already used to like this journey process, right? So like the deployment itself, right? Like we're getting ready to go to area, so you're kind of researching the area, you're training up, you understand like your mission, how you integrate into it, the actual journey there, but then also the coming back from it. Like we come back, we refit, we pass on the lessons learned from that. Like this is like something we've been repeating for like the last 20 years now. And I think that's one of the reasons why like a psychedelic therapy like this is so effective, like for veterans, for those that are like, that want to go down that path. We already have like this template, the template of like what we'd classically refer to as like the young, like heroic journey, where, you're prepping yourself for this to go out, to experience like this trials, to unlock yourself, and then to bring that back, right? Because to me, that's something that I really began to realize why it's so important to heal. I mean, yeah, obviously you want to be better, but I started realizing as I kind of floated like around in this community, like how much potential for our communities that we're being robbed of, because we have this whole segment of like veterans who are part of like the community that are kind of like debased from the rest of us, right? So some of it, there's a lot of different reasons why I think it happens, but you get kind of like almost put on a pedestal to a degree. Like there's a separation between the veteran experience and normal everyday experience that all the rest of America is living, or wherever you're living really. And that separation creates like a lot of difficulty, like coming back into that, like the reintegration. And it's something that like our society doesn't really have a great template for. Like if you look back, even like back to Vietnam, World War II, World War I, the classic veteran journey has been you go to fight so others don't have to. When you come back, you box that shit up and you don't talk about it. Ever. Unless you're maybe at the VFW and you're old and you want to tell some war stories to your buddies who actually get it. But everybody else, we don't talk about it. And it's a technique. I don't think it's a very good one, because eventually that stuff, it comes back. Like it's all there. And like I've seen, I come from a very small town, and there's a guy who I used to shovel snow for when I was like a kid, and Odie. And he's a World War II veteran. Like people kind of knew he was like in the war, but like didn't really know. He never really talked about it or anything. And so he had cancer in his last month. He was pretty much hospitalized, but his last month was basically nonstop, like everything came back. And so he was a machine gunner in the 101st during the Battle of the Bulge. Oh. His wife never knew anything. He had won like, I think like 2 silver stars, like did just experience. Never talked about it with anybody, just kind of kept it inside until literally like his body just started failing, and like that's when it all came out. So his last month of his life was basically like one waking like nightmare of like everything coming back. So that's just like one vignette of probably like a million, right? We all have like those things, but what we don't realize is like the potential of those experiences. Like when we finish that process, when we bring back everything as a member of the community, like that's so much like potential for everybody else that we're connected to. But if we don't, then like it ends up festering. And like in my own life, that's 100% like what happened. You know, like I came back, I didn't talk about stuff for like the longest time. It ended up just kind of rotting and festering there. And I mean, it affected obviously my marriage, it affected my kids, like, and pretty much everything I was connected to, like it began to kind of like seep into that. And I mean, that was only for me a short period of time. You know, I think some people carry things all the way like to the end, and some people break down halfway between here and there. But I think ultimately, like being able to bring those experiences back and reconnect the veteran experience with the community, like, I mean, beyond like just personal healing, you're also looking at like really making the best for everybody, which I think it's often an oversighted thing. It's work. It's not an easy thing to do, but I think some of us, we get to this point. Like I said, for me, it was like the day that my former wife like left. Like that was, for me, it was just a breaking point. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like I need something. I need to work at this. And that's how I ended up tripping balls in the jungle, man.
Well, I know a lot of dudes that could definitely benefit from something like that. I've talked to friends kind of about your experience, and you know, one of them's like, "Nope, I'm gonna keep drinking gin." You know, like I don't want, like literally straight up verbatim, I do not want to relive those events. Yeah. I am good where I'm at, you know, and you're just like, all right, you know, but then there's a lot of communities that are super embracing it. I was speaking to another friend recently who works in, he's part of like a nonprofit who does something similar to the program that you were, is finding, you know, resolution for TBI and stuff like that. And one of them is, you know, ayahuasca tours or some type of psychotropic, you know, event. And I was talking to him recently because I shoot PRS with a guy who's a part owner of a main pharmaceutical company that's doing a stateside version of ayahuasca in their own vision. You know, obviously not the physical plants, but a chemical version of it. And their whole mission is also specific to veteran TBI and solving those issues stateside. So it's a really cool, it was funny, I was talking to one, talking to the other, and like just introduced them. They're doing something together. They're figuring something out for vets that are part of this program to potentially be part of that program. So I think that's great. And you know, there's a bunch of units too that are actively experimenting, right?
Yeah,
without saying names and what.
Without saying names, it's it's really interesting to see like the shift, because even when I did this experience, this was 2019. I mean, obviously drugs are bad. Don't do drugs, which is pretty much what we've always been told. And you know, to be fair and honest about it, like this isn't like just do drugs and it's going to solve your problem. You know, like there's the preparation for it, there's the journey itself, and then there's coming back. Like it is a full spectrum experience. Yeah. But I mean, for me going, like I risked fucking like losing my retirement, like everything. Like, but I also was at a point where I had made a decision where this is what I knew was going to give me like my breakthrough. And a lot of times, I kind of learned this from my times coaching, a lot of times your methodology or your mechanism of healing a lot of times comes down to what you actually believe is going to fix it. If you don't believe it's going to help, it probably isn't. So like, some people might be hearing this and they're like, man, that's fucking crazy, I would never do that. And like, yeah, like don't. If you don't want it, like don't do it. Like, but it's something that you're like, man, like when I had that epiphany of being like, that's just crazy enough, it might work. That might be something to kind of follow into. But going back to like 2019, like that was a time when like this was not like a thing that like people really did in like our community. Since then, there's been a fascinating shift, especially within special operations, of units being way more open and accepting of this. Even in, I think it was 2020, SOCOM basically has just allowed for battlefield application of like ketamine in an effort to basically reduce the traumatic experience. So that has been, that blew my mind when that happened, like issuing ketamine for that. So you're starting to see a lot more shift to this, because realistically, like, this is a huge problem, like, for our community. I think you're going to see some serious issues start coming up for guys. I mean, they're already here, but I think you're going to see it blossom and bloom in a way that will make what's going on right now, like our crisis of like the veteran health, is not awesome right now. It's not good. But a lot of times, like, these sort of things, it takes time for it to trickle down. So we just got done doing 20 years of, GWAT. The wave that's going to come after that is going to start peaking. But there is units that are already looking at this, because they're looking at this from a perspective of like, holy shit, we have put our dudes through a lot. Like, your average operator, to create that, like, it's not something you can mass produce. You cannot mass produce a special operator. Like, it's a certain type of person.
Huge investment.
And with a certain set of skill sets. Like, there's a monetary number that you could probably attach to it, but the reality is there's only so many of them. And so we're losing those dudes. Like myself, like, honestly, the reason I left a team to go teach at the sniper school was because I was already burnt the fuck out. And so, like, I knew, like, if I'm perfectly honest with myself, like in 2013 when I came back from Afghanistan, that rotation, I really didn't want to deploy again at that point, because I knew deep down I was fucked up to a point where I was like, I could be a potential liability. And so, like, a lot of those dudes are either getting out, or they're getting sidelined, or they're just running until they actually break. And so to get dudes back in, like, they're looking at fucking anything, really, because if you look across the manning, at least I'm pretty sure for most services it's probably somewhat similar, but just within USASOC, manning in the last couple of years has fluctuated from anywhere from like only 60-80% full manning. So, like, what's going on there? Like, they're trying to produce them, but they're not. Like, guys are leaving just as fast. And so we've done things in the past, like in the mid to late 2000s, one of the things we started recognizing is physical injuries. So, like, we started, USASOC, we had like the Thor 3 program, which was all about physical prepping dudes. Like, so, we brought in nutritionists, we brought in like coaches and, Olympic coaches, professional sports coaches, built like entire gyms just so we could be like, okay, we need you to be at the peak, we need you to not be hurt, and we need you to be successful. So that's kind of like obvious, like, direct thread. Now I think we're looking at things from this other side, from like the mental health aspect of it. And, psychedelics is one aspect of it where it sounds fucking crazy, because there is so much, what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for here? There's so much prejudice against it, from like the 70s. And
when they turned it into a Class A narcotic.
The 70s was a pretty wild time, right? And if we could deep dive, those events, and like how on earth did it become a Schedule I drug when it does not meet any of the criteria? So, like, you look at LSD or like marijuana or like mushrooms, like all these Schedule I substances that meet none of the criteria for a Schedule I substance. Kind of weird. But anyways, there's a lot of stigma that kind of comes from those times. And so people fucking hear this, or they see like a news article about this, and they're like, oh man, we're giving drugs to the troops and stuff. But I think what's really happening is, like, the chickens are coming home to roost, and like, we're trying to figure out, all right, how do we deal with this? And this is, I think, one mechanism among many. There's a lot of other awesome medicine that's come out in like the last 5 years, kind of revolving around this sort of stuff. But I mean, that's the reality. Like, we send out like the best of us to do these things, and what we were doing to actually bring them back. And this is, I think, a part of that, because everybody benefits from it. So,
I mean, coming back to society and being an upstanding member of society and doing your part to, you know, your mental health, to the investment, like you just said, like you're on round 2, you got your second wind and you're all about it, and you know, you want to keep working and not retire. You know, you definitely want that mentality for everybody, you know, not everybody.
Even if you're not staying in service, you know, like a lot of guys get out when they hit their 20, but like, for me, like, I'm staying because I'm like, oh man, I actually fucking love doing this shit.
Yeah.
Like, why would I ever get out? But even from there, it's like, okay, well, how do I integrate within my community? Like, if I was the version of myself that I was still in, like, you know, pre-ayahuasca, I would not be as nearly as good, I would say, good of a person. I'm not a productive member of society to the same level. Would I have been like a bad person? No, like, would have been just me, but like less of me. I would have been running at like 60%. And, you know, maybe like my 60% might be somebody else's like 90%. But like I knew, I was like, I'm not my full self. I want to be my full self. I want to be my full self for whatever service I continue to do, for my family, for myself. And, you know, I think that's what everybody kind of wants. And when you have people that are actually able to be them full selves like that again, I mean, that's just a net gain, like, for everybody. But it is a process.
Yeah, but it's cool that, you know, some of these dudes that I know that are like super hitters, they're not opposed to this. It's not, they don't look at it like as a narcotic or something like that, or a drug. They're looking at it as a solution to so many different problems. And yeah, I mean, government, you know, U.S. military invests so much in you guys, and it's like, oh man, you're thrown, and with all the wokeness and the quality, like, for example, we've got here, he's like an assistant coach for, you know, Manchester inner city football team, and he was saying that these kids just have, they're soft. You know, they come from hard homes, but they're softer than they used to be. They don't have the drive to be, you know, when he first started coaching them. Now that he's kind of honing them and forging these kids, but he was saying that, you know, when he first started, like, you can't, raise your voice at all, because then these kids, you know, they'll just shut down. They'll just walk off the field. They're done. You know, they don't care about winning, but they don't have that gumption. You know, when I was a kid, I remember it's like you either win or you lose, and no, you don't get a participation trophy, you know? Whereas like these kids, if they get shouted at, probably because there's a lot of childhood trauma, let's call it childhood trauma in the inner city too. You know, these kids, what do they do at home when they get yelled at or talked down to? You know, they shut down. You know, how do you turn the sport into a way for them to kind of fight their battles back? Like, this is your outlet, you know, use it. So he was just explaining when he first started, he's like, I can't even like have a hard talk with these kids for fear of losing key players, because they just don't want to be spoken to other than, hey, you're doing a great job, Billy, you know? And I'm sure, damn sure, that they're having that issue in the military, seeing like certain selection processes soften up and certain, you know, certain requirements starting to lessen. And that's not what makes, at least I got no skin in the game. I didn't serve, but to me, from an outside perspective looking in, you don't want to soften people up at all.
Yeah. That's like a huge struggle, I think, in our society as a whole, is like softness. And this is actually something that's been like near and dear to me in like the last year or so. It's kind of recognizing like this crisis of like the masculine crisis that we have here, particularly for whatever reason, like the hardness as I see it, like within the realm of the masculine, it's pretty wild. Like, it's not good, because I honestly, sometimes I feel like I've lived in like a bubble for a lot of my life, and I guess I technically have, you know, being, you know, in special forces, like you're always surrounded by like the hardest, best motherfuckers out there. And then sometimes I step out to the rest of the world and like, I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, this is soft out here. Like, and not to like I don't want to like degrade like anybody, but we've lost contact like with a part of that. And I think some of it is like kind of like this, there's so many different aspects to it, but tapping back into that, like wanting to create basically people that are more resilient, especially for me, like that's something that's been huge on my mind. We've actually talked about doing this at Ridgline, doing like a course, basically a man maker course. You know, we talk about like the mountain rifleman course, which apparently broke some people.
Broke them on the ascent before shooting.
Before even
Rudy.
shooting.
Oh my God.
I wasn't trying to. Sometimes I just look at the spectrum and I try to pick a.
Doesn't help they're carrying 25-pound rifles.
Well, yeah, that's
and
your
these
own
dudes don't
goddamn
rock.
fault. All right, if you're running a 25-pound 6mm, like you deserve that.
Cheaters.
But in all seriousness, yeah, like the crisis, the crisis of masculinity in our culture it's pretty freaking staggering. And I think it is a substrate that a lot of other issues that we're having are kind of built off of. You know, when we look at, you know, school shooters and stuff and things like that, when we look at, you know, just the general like softness of people, we call like toxic masculinity. I don't really think that people say toxic masculinity. I just see like undeveloped masculinity. Like that energy is there. It's just a lot of guys just don't know what to do with this, right? And they want to. Like
it's mostly ignorance.
It's
lack of common sense and ignorance.
What it is. And you know, like there's very practical aspects to it. Like sometimes I just want to teach dudes how to like change their tire. Like they never changed their tires before.
Frankie.
I just relearned to drive this year.
Yeah, go to Marine, taught him how to change a tire.
Okay, but like that's things like some of us have never had anybody in our lives to teach us those things.
Right.
And then like other things like honestly like man skills that were just kind of associated, like how to make a fire. Like
I'll teach you, Frankie.
Those are like just things that like when you learn how to do those, like it's all right. How often are you going to build a fire in your life? Normally, like practically speaking, not often, but there is a psychological component to it, like learning, the ability to learn these skills. But like we're not taught these things, right? They're like our desire to do so is ingrained through, you know, eons of like evolutionary development. But like all of a sudden, this world that we live in now, a lot of us don't have access to that stuff.
Right.
I feel pretty lucky growing up the way that I did, but I'm realizing more and more, like you have kids that don't have that.
So foreign now.
It's weird to see it. Like, and now like when you see it, I'm just like, damn, it's badass. But I'm like, oh man, that should be more common thing.
We had video games growing up, but we just wanted to be outside more.
Yeah, or we got kicked outside.
I joke that the fall of men and masculinity is the air conditioner.
It could be. There's definitely, there's a softness, like the comfort. Actually, there's an awesome book, The Comfort Crisis. Have you ever read it?
No, but I'm going to read it.
Highly recommend it. Because it fucking nails down on like kind of the exact like situation that we've created is like basically comfort. Like we're afraid of being uncomfortable. And that's one of the things like I love so much about my experiences is that I've been forced to continuously be uncomfortable. Now it's almost become a ritual for me. Like I get an itch, like if I haven't done something in a while that makes me feel uncomfortable, I'm like, I need to go do something. I need to do something fucking crazy. And to a certain degree, like, you know, my former wife asked me, she's just like, when I told her I was going to the jungle, she's like, why do you always have to do fucking crazy shit? And I was like, I don't know. I think part of it is because like it's this kind of pattern of creating extreme uncomfortableness. But the process of creating uncomfortableness, like it creates struggle, which I think is so important, like in life, to either have struggle or even intentionally create struggle if it needs to be created like that, because that's what actually builds like the resistance. You know, it's just like going to the gym, but you know, like on an actual mental level, an emotional level, we live in a world right now that's like so orientated towards being comfortable. Like everybody wants to take the easy route, you know, like there's an app for that, the app for everything, right? Which is awesome. Don't get me wrong, because it allows us to do so much more things like technology. You know, like there's stuff that we can do with air conditioning that would be difficult to do without it. But in a way, it's just become like this normal situation. And all of a sudden, like you go outside and you're like, man, it's hot. I don't want to be out here. I'm going to go back inside.
Right.
And then you're soft. And then when you're soft, you're basically setting yourself up in ways that end up individually putting yourself at risk, but also as a greater collective, you put yourself at risk as well.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of times like we're so concerned with like this world of like being safe, being perfect. Like, you know, I look at like all these different kind of like movements or like whatever, and it's all about trying to make the world a better place, which I kind of get. But honestly, I think the point of this existence isn't to change the world, but it's to be changed by the world. Like, the point of this existence is to go get fucked up. Like, because that's where life fucking happens. And like, once you start learning the process for this, which is something that for me, like going to the jungle and doing like ayahuasca, I realized, holy shit, like I'm just relearning this fucking process again. But some of us have never been pushed in that direction. I think it helps if we start early, you know, like if you have, you know, father figures or actual fathers that are pushing you in that direction, like it can totally like reshape like your outlook. And just think like, again, like veterans who have this templated experience of suffering. Like most of us know what suffering is like. And so again, that's one of like these gifts that you can return with. You know, think of like your buddy who's coaching. So he's a single person, but he's interacting with how many individual children, right?
Another Marine.
Yeah. So each one is like a potential growth point. Not everybody is going to, because everybody's journey is a little bit different, but you know, one or two kids per season, a slight shift towards learning how to be uncomfortable. And like that begins to set the pattern. And that goes back to like kind of like all of this, of just like wanting to bring back, for me, like bringing back veterans in a way that's meaningful in order to bring back all these things. So those experiences that we learned, those were fucking hard earned. Like those are things that not everybody has access to, like experiential wise. And so to leave that locked up, that's a fucking crying shame.
Right. And you know, I want to touch on a couple things real quick. So again, like you said, resets. I think one of the biggest resets for me was like doing a 9-day elk hunt in Idaho at 10,000 feet, where we had to get up there on horses and bathe in streams. And that was like my great reset for me. That was in 2020. Didn't shoot an elk, but you know, the journey to get there, 5 different ways of transportation just to get up to the camp. And it was a really magical place. Didn't shoot anything. Mainers fucked it up for us. But you know, my first day was my hardest day I've ever had physically on my body in the last 10 years. It was 4,000 pieces of deadfall crossed at waist height.
Those are the worst.
At, you know, I think it was more like 8,000 foot where we were hunting. I think we did 2,100 feet of vertical that day, throughout the day, because we basically hunted down into the valley and then back up on 80-degree inclines chasing bulls. And after it was just, my hip flexors were so bad that I was literally dragging my feet. And what would normally be like an hour walk back to camp took me 3 hours. It was dark when I rolled into camp, you know. This part of Idaho, there's no grizzlies, there's wolves. We were getting tracked by wolves a lot, but you know, they're just more curious. You know, it wasn't, the only thing I was afraid of out there was the fucking moose that we heard.
Dude, mooses are mean.
I saw the hoof print and we thought we were stalking an elk, and then I looked at the guide and I'm like, hoof print this fucking big into the ground. I'm like, moose. He's like, because we heard its antlers doink off of, you know, those conifers up there, the spruces, and they make a very sharp sound, and you're just like, yep, it's too loud. Elk are pretty quiet, other than if they have a big rack, you'll hear it doink off of a spruce, but this was big and loud and obnoxious, and you knew that it didn't give a fuck. So we're like, all right, let's get the fuck out of there. Anyway, so that was like a great reset for me. Boy Scouts, I did Boy Scouts my whole life. And then hunting has been what brings me back in my head now. I have a bird dog, chase her over the mountains up in North Country, up in Pittsburgh and Errol, and I basically drive to Canada and hunt home with my dog, and we do 12, 15 miles a day. And she was a pup, we did that when she was a puppy, and you're not supposed to do it, but her drive was so insane that it kind of had to. And chasing a prize one dog is fun. This is her second season, and she's a Deutsch Kutzar, so she's a GSP, and she's got legs on her. She'll move. She does like 200-yard casts, and then you'll hear the bell stop, and you're like fucking grouse, like you're running. And this is tough country up there, and I do it by myself with her 3 days a week, and we're doing like 50 miles a week together, and that's the most at peace that I've felt in a long time, because it's just that quiet. Not only learning like the environments of what you're hunting, but that like you're learning the habitats and the environments. And then you start to notice things that you didn't normally notice. Like I fucking hate hiking. I think hiking is dumb. Like hiking a mountain and getting to the top of the mountain means fuck, I have to hike back down. Like there's no goal. Like going to the top of a mountain isn't a goal for me. Like there's nothing about it that I give a fuck about, But when I'm hunting over my dog, I'm watching her work. Like the joy of watching an animal that we've bioengineered over eons to do work for us is so cool. And there's a dog species for everything, or a dog breed for everything, except French Bulldog. They're fucking useless. And I feel bad for French Bulldogs because they have been bioengineered to be abused their whole life because of their respiratory issues. Like, then you hunt over a true hunting dog, and you're just like, man, this is fucking unreal. So for me, watching the dogs work, hunting, getting out there by myself, and just filling my bird bag is rad for me, And that's my exercise season. Like I fucking summer, this is my first summer with a kid, so didn't get to do as much outdoors as I wanted to, but I told my wife, I was like, I'm hunting hard this year, She's like, okay.
Yeah, there's something about hunting that's different, like you're saying. It's different than hiking in terms of how you're interacting.
You're looking
with
at your trees, the plants, what they're eating, the vegetation, like especially grouse, they sleep in old growth. They hang out in mid to young growth for feeding during the day. What kind of day is it? Woodcock have a certain soil type, so you're kicking leaves around. You'll hit something softer and more wet, and you're like, shit, this could be woodcock cover. You start kicking leaves around, and you see it's that dark, coffee ground looking earth, and you're like, well, we're probably gonna bump some woodcock here, And then you start, even driving down the fucking highway now. Whenever I'm driving down the highway, going up to Ridgline or whatever, I whip out onyx and pin things. And I've driven like off the highway and like dropped pins. And then I go back and find out, I go back and open up an onyx, pull my lat longe, and I'm like, oh, that's a fucking wetland preserve, hunting preserve that you're public that you can hunt this time of year in. It looked like a perfect woodcock habitat off the highway, and then I'll go explore. So I found so many cool places in New Hampshire just like driving and being like, woodcock cover, grouse cover, they stock pheasant in this area, let's go fuck around over there and see what else we can find. And I've just like grown to love my state so much more. And just finding those little niche areas that, my wife hates it because I have this like thing when we're driving, I'm like, that's a woodcock cover over there. Like, just like I say that, I was like, hey, what I just saw? And I throw in like a Kentucky accent. She's like, woodcock cover? Like, yeah, it's woodcock cover right there. And she's just like, what the She's like, now she does the voice now. Oh, woodcock cover? Like, yep, that's a woodcock cover. Now she will point and be like, is that a woodcock cover? Yep, you're getting it. Like, so you start to have that perspective of your local habitat and your local environment. And it's so fucking cool. I love hunting.
It's definitely something that, again, it taps into you, something I think that's just like biologically like coded like in us. This year is actually the first year I'm going back to hunting. I haven't hunted in fucking years. But yeah, it's something intriguing about it, like, and it flips a switch somewhere's in there. It's a little bit different than hiking. I do like hiking, but it's totally different when you're walking and you're engaging kind of like with the environment, with the animals, and a very primal aspect to it that I think it's really good. Like I think it helps reset like things like mentally.
I hate when people call it harvesting animals. Like you didn't cultivate this animal. You didn't fucking plant it. You didn't create its habit. Now I do know there's a lot of friends of mine that do work with like Rough Grouse Society and stuff like that, and they work with the logging companies to patch quilt the logging to create those really cool microenvironments for grouse populations, because they need that really dynamic. To boost the grouse population, you need like new growth, like new cut stuff, so all the saplings that have buds, they eat those in the winter. Mid growth is where they kind of live during the day and feed, and they have a mix of everything. And then old growth, they roost in the older growth stuff. So if you start looking at maps of New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont, and you start finding these logging areas that are public to hunting, and you start seeing these patch, almost like a checkerboard, like that is someone from an environmental community cultivating that environment for grouse while working with the logging areas. Like, don't just log this giant area. Can you patch quilt it? And it's good for the growth too, because they get a little bit of shade or they get the right amount of sun. So the logging, people are like, oh, fuck logging. Logging's terrible. But the logging industry in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire has actually like made the most healthy population of grouse that we've ever fucking seen. And it's also interesting because of like where we are, the salination in the air, everything, our forests grow so much faster than, let's say, like Michigan. Like the grouse woods in Michigan, their trees look like our 15-year growth or 20-year growth, whereas it's like 30, they're going on like year 37 for that logging area. It just, everything grows so much fucking slower over there. So they get these really fantastic grouse covers that 2 generations of men can enjoy. Whereas here in New Hampshire, our shit's grown out in half that time, maybe even a third of that time. So we're constantly having to explore and find these new areas. So like a grouse camp in Michigan could be passed down, you know, to the next generation, where in New Hampshire it's like, oh, well, now we're going to drive 50 minutes to the next cover, you know? So it's interesting in that regard. But I mean, just being aware of everything, you just become so much more aware. Whereas, you know, with hiking, your goal is to get to the top of that mountain, or maybe your goal is your physique in hiking. You're building your body up for a certain purpose. That's cool. I like that. That's great. But I would also rather just have a constant purpose with every step I take. For me, and it's just, that's how my mind processes.
Totally. It's intentions and expectations. You know what we were talking about at the beginning.
Yes. I have ADHD really bad, and for me, like, focusing on an 8-hour goal with one goal in mind is not good enough for me. Like, I need to.
What's that over there? Squirrel.
I need to. Squirrel. Like, I do like eating squirrel.
Dude, I love squirrel. I used to hunt. Back in the day, I would hunt red squirrels. A lot of people don't know. Red squirrel, like, especially wintertime, like around like December, the fucking best. Like, put it in like a crock pot. And this is what I used to do. I'd put it in a crock pot and basically parboil for like 3 or 4 hours, so all the meat just falls off. And then basically just makes it like kind of like pulled pork.
Yep.
Makes like the best fucking taco meat ever.
I do it a little differently, but same outcome. Well, same purpose. I make tacos. I do 6 gray squirrels in a baking pan, deep dish, butter, salt, pepper. And I do 3.5 to 4 hours at 275, super low and slow, and then same deal, just peels right off the bone. I break it all down, clean all the bones, and then I stick it in a saucepan with taco seasoning.
There you go. Well, practically the
and
same.
just finish it in the pan, and it still breaks down the proteins a little bit more. So same but different.
Yeah, squirrel is like one of the most underrated like available proteins out there. Like, my kids love it too, and like they're like, back in the day, you used to eat it all the time.
It's
I used to have
nutty.
a good red wine rabbit stew too, but for some reason the Northeast doesn't really seem to have like a raw. When I lived out in California, I would do like rabbit stew all the time. Just slay.
Cottontails are protective species in New Hampshire, other than like one section. Up past Ridgline, there's tons of snow hares. The snow hares in my backyard.
Don't see them often though.
You gotta
occasionally.
They unfortunately habitat the same covers as grouse. So when I go up north, the Beagle Boys from fucking North Carolina, with their fucking trucks full of beagles, are hitting covers where we're like, oh, if we get here before the beagles do, we'll be able to shoot grouse, you know? And my favorite's where you get some southerner and they put the old guy on the road, so when the hare runs across the road, he can smack it. And they're putting in so much work for one hare, which I guess I put in a lot of work for one grouse. But regardless, a lot of animals for one animal hunted. And I remember this one time we're driving and we see this guy, he's got the yellow lenses on and he's sitting in the cold part of the mountain, just sitting there with his fucking gun waiting. You can hear the beagles coming down the hill and they're probably like 200 yards out. You know that rabbit's between, 100 yards out from this road. So my buddy Joe's driving, we hit the dead end, we turn around. We didn't realize it was a dead end. They closed it off the logging road. So we're driving back, and as we're driving back, we're just about to, the guy's standing here and we're just about to pass him, and Joe pumps the brakes. He goes, I fucked you. And the guy goes, what? And you see the fucking snow hare just jump across. And they just worked the best hair cover for that one animal, and that one animal just jumped right into the swamp and took off, and he was like deadpan. We're like, see ya. You beat our grouse cover to shit. There goes, we don't feel bad, there goes your rabbit. But man, they were fucking mad. Like, hopefully you don't bump into them at the restaurant tonight.
Well, it goes around, comes around.
It's funny, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. I wish we could shoot rabbits with 22 and thermal, because they only come out my yard at night.
Yeah, man, I wish I could go back. When I lived in California and do so much rabbit hunting, I'd go, I lived out at Camp Pendleton, so we'd go up to the aerial gunnery ranges when they were closed down. You could hunt on base. And just up in the San Margarita Mountains, and you just sit up on a knoll like a 22 and just smoke rabbits like all day long. I mean, they're just everywhere it's out there.
That's awesome.
It's fucking great. But yeah, those days I think will probably come to a close out there.
Yeah, same thing with Kansas. I guess there's a good pheasant coverage on base down in Kansas, and you have to apply to be on it. I was hoping to hunt White Sands this year. White Sands Missile Range, where they have all the wild oryx in New Mexico. I put in my tags. It asked me for my year before hunter survey, and I filled it out and hit submit, but somehow their New Mexico Fish and Game website didn't take it. It said saved or whatever, accepted, and then I proceeded through and I paid for my tags, which are $1,200. And then when the draw came out, it was like, you're not eligible because you didn't fill out your survey. I was like, I sure fucking did. But when I paid for it, the website lagged and it auto refreshed. I don't know if it killed it. And I didn't go back and look at my receipt to see if I filled it out. So I could have logged back in and filled it out anyway, but I didn't realize it. I just did it and forgot about it. Man, Fish and Game are assholes. I emailed them. I was like, hey, why would I not do this? It literally says at the receipt, if you didn't fill this out, you don't get your draw, your lottery. And the guy would never call me back or respond via email. And I know they have some dude, it's a $1,200 tag. I'm trying to, it's not locals $100. It's a lot of money, especially where you go and hunt oryx. They're the poorest fucking towns. Truth or consequences.
Yeah, for real.
So you're bringing commerce to that area. You would want as many out-of-staters that are paying big money for taxes or big money for tags to, bring in all that extra money for conservation. And it's all private land hunting too, so you have to pay big money for guides. So yeah, that was a cool hunt though. Want to do it again?
That sounds badass. Well, be fucking badass.
Fuck Brown and cross bolts or X bolts. That gun would
not.
not.
Brown and X bolt.
It would not hold a tight group at 400 yards.
That's weird because everybody tells me how awesome their Brown and X bolt is.
They're terrible. So I was shooting 300 Win Mag. I ended up having to shoot SIG's NATO stuff because it was the only ammo I could get to hold sub 4-inch group at 400 yards. Not 400. It was more like a 6 or 7 inch group. But then I'd always have like a random flyer that wasn't destabilized, and I was like, fuck. It pissed me off. I was running like an ATACR 7-35, and also I got bad intel. Like Dustin Coleman was like, all right, longest shot's gonna be 400 yards. And I was like, 400, okay. All right, so I can hit a pie plate pretty consistently with this gun at 400 yards. Luckily, an Oryx is like 5 pie plates for their kill box. Like, sure, not a problem. And then we get there, and the guide's like, no, minimum shot's 400. And Dustin only did his dope card and his 28 Nosler to fucking 500 yards. Which I'm like, dude, you have applied ballistics. You know this shit. Like, pull it out. But he didn't save it. You know? And our first morning, the first hour of the first morning, there's like 2 500-pounders at 700 yards.
Jesus Christ. We'll start stalking.
No, that's probably, they already had eyes on the truck. And they have 7 power or 12 power vision. They have 12 power vision in their eyes.
That must be so weird to be that animal. Just be like 12 power like all the time. I don't know.
Like, so he's like, oh yeah, they're eyes on. Like they won't let us we can try stalking, and my cameraman at the time wouldn't get low because he was trying to keep everything on the tripod, and he wouldn't get low. So it was like, and the guide kept yelling at him like, get the fuck down. Like, let's try to close this gap. And it just, my camera guy wasn't having it. Guide wasn't having it. Animals wouldn't let us get closer than like 600. And I was like, man, I'm never fucking doing this shit again unless I have a capable weapon system out to 1,000 yards where I'm like, okay, this animal's gonna fucking die. And so I completely reconfigured my life after that hunt. That's one of those experiences though. You're like, yep, what I showed up with cannot get the job done. I need to completely break it back down and build it back up. And that's why I switched over to like 6.5, 300 Weatherby Magnum, 3,700 feet per second.
Zippy zap.
Yep, and that'll fucking fuck them up.
What's your elevation to 1,000? Like 6?
5.1.
5.1. God. That's like right in 375. Chi-Tech territory.
It's fast.
I want to say my 375 was like 4 something to 1,000.
I'll have to check my...
That's fucking...
Actually, let me look at...
That's a standard long action?
I'll show you this gun in a sec. I'll show you this after we're done recording. Not now. 1,000 yards trajectory. Yeah, 5.1, 1,000.
That's flat right there.
You know, I hadn't actually looked at the 1,000. I was just guessing from
That's a pretty good guess.
the 400 yard that I shot. And I was like, oh, it's gotta be this. Well, my 6.5 Creedmoor gold medal match was like 6.2
Yeah, that's not bad.
at under 6.2 or 6.3 at, yeah. So it's 5.1 on the nose. Fuck me.
Dude, fucking send it. That's a nice thing though. The faster you get, though, like the less guessing you gotta do.
Anyway, I feel like the wheels are falling off.
All right.
Rudy, it's been, you said butter me up, baby. This is gonna be a wild ride.
We've covered a lot of ground.
I feel like we have. Listeners listening to this podcast are definitely gonna understand you a lot better.
They're going to have a lot more questions.
Well, that's great.
I got some serious questions about this fella.
So, if you guys are listening and you have questions, put them in the comment section on our YouTube. That's where you guys can comment. Everything else is audio uploaded. But yeah, I mean, we didn't even scratch the surface into the shooting stuff that we like to talk about.
Kind of dibble-dabbled around that.
Sure did. That's okay. This podcast is historically more about if I have a person that owns a manufacturing company, they come on, cool. Everyone can just go to your website and read your about us and your mission statement, look at your products and figure out what you do. Like that's such a fucking minutia sliver of what this podcast really is about. This podcast is about like what kind of brought you to this point in life. What are your inspirations? What makes you tick? We want this podcast so that people can understand our guests much better in an aspect where it's like we're not just doing this, what does Rudy think the best gun is? Or what does Rudy think the best pistol is? Oh, Springco 1911 springs have a 30K life.
Do they? Well, that's awesome because I just had my 1911 stolen last week.
Why did you leave it unlocked in your car?
And it's a long story about how you talked to Blake about it. He did the report for me. It's actually a blessing. I know Alex Hartman is probably like, he might have actually been the one who stole it, son of a bitch. But they've been trying to get me to lose that thing for a while.
Rule number 1004: never leave guns in the truck overnight. Ever.
It wasn't overnight.
Ooh, we had like a wedding.
It wasn't overnight, and there was a reason why it was left in there. But yeah, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Now you just need to buy a 2011.
Oh, God.
I just put a Springco green number 8 in, and they told me it's around 30K compared to the Wolf Springs that are 4K.
Yeah, that's about right. It's 3 or 4K. That's usually what I used to switch it out.
So now I have a reason for you to go back to a 1911.
I don't know. I don't know if I want to go back.
You can't go forward. That's what I'm saying. You can get a 2011, which is a 1911.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, Rudy, it's been real as fuck. And we're going to definitely have to have you back for a round 2. And we'll have to talk more gun things and sniper things.
Snipers?
Stuff that you're obsessed with.
Got a lot of interest, though. So, but yeah, we can narrow it down.
We could definitely narrow it down. What you can't see on film is Rudy's wearing silkies. And
well, yeah.
I can't smell him from here, thank God.
Your dog can.
My dog sure can. So anyway, that was episode 27 of the ANR Design Unholstered podcast. Rudy Gonz was our wonderful guest. And thank you so much for making the drive to hang out with us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me over, man. It's great.